Welcome to the Resistance Chronicle. I'm Matt.
I'm Eric.
And we just brought on Ricky Varandas of the Ripple Effect podcast. One of my favorites. Guy's got the gift of gab. This one went on for a while. We
3 hours or so?
It wasn't that long. We officially started it at 6:45 and it's 9:15 right now. So no edits in this. Ricky rants on the Resistance Chronicle. Check it out. If it wasn't for this guy,
this wouldn't be here.
I don't think it would be. You know, he was quick to respond to any questions that I had, and he's just an awesome, genuine, great dude. Enjoy the podcast.
Enjoy our awesome intro.
It's not a political statement. It's a patriotic duty.
And the editors of great newspapers, such as yours, owe a common obligation to the people.
But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream.
What are you people? On dope?
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
But we have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
Perfect. So we're recording. Here we are with Ricky Varandas of the Ripple Effect podcast. This is the Resistance Chronicle. I'm Matt.
I'm Eric.
And thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I'm a super huge fan. I came to your work through probably like tinfoil hat and just hearing your name out there in the stratosphere of alternative media. And you were actually a big inspiration for this podcast. And me and Eric kind of coming together saying, let's do a podcast. I reached out to you. You gave me some advice on the Podomatic and whatnot. Yeah. So it's awesome to have you here. It's an honor, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you guys having me. It's always weird because one day you guys are going to be interviewed and you're like, why the fuck does anybody want to talk to me? That's always the feeling I get. I'm like, why does anybody want to talk to me? But it's always an honor. And I think content creators, one thing that we're doing now more than ever, and I think it's a good thing, is that we're influencing other content creators. So it's like, you're not just influencing people in the way they think, but in the way they act. And so you're starting to hear more and more podcasters and content creators talking about like, hey, somebody reached out to me, I helped them start their podcast, I helped them do a YouTube channel or whatever. And I think that's important because it's like we're all in this together, and every voice we have out there putting out some sense of truth, it's one more voice fighting back against the propaganda.
Yeah, and it was because of your interview or Ricky Rants with the Fans, I was able to hook up with Adam over at Deborah Gets Red Pilled. He came on a couple of weeks ago, so thanks for that, man. So you got the Ripple Effect, you got Union of the Unwanted.
Best name ever made.
Yeah.
By the way, I do want to say that is the best name ever.
Mike gets all the credit for that from the OBDM show. If I don't know if you went back and listened to the archive. So initially, it was a show. So I don't know if you know the origin story of the show, but the way it all came about was, if you go back in my archives, I love like gathering people and doing like swap casts or whatever. And I was just, I think it was me, actually how it all started. Hopefully this isn't too long of a story. How it all actually started, to go right to the root of it, was somebody hit me up, and I can't remember who, and said, hey, you should go on the OBDM show or something like that. And then the OBDM show ended up inviting me on, which is Mike's show. So I went on there, and I think they stream Wednesday nights and Saturday, and I was on like a Saturday show. And like Saturday afternoon, I get an email from Charlie saying, dude, you were just on my favorite show. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh, the OBDM show. He's like, I love that show. I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, well, they're super cool. Let's all hook up and do a swap cast. Let's hang out. So we end up doing a swap cast, and then I'm like, hey, if we're gonna hang out, it was like a Friday night show, and I'm like, hey, we'll all hang out. And maybe we'll stream it or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'll throw the invite to a couple people that I'm friends with and in the podcast community and see if they want to hang out. And it just happened that Sam was the only one who was available, last second to show up. So he ends up showing up. So it's me, Sam, Charlie, and Mike. And Sam didn't know who Mike was. He knew Charlie because Charlie's been on this show before. And me and Sam kind of knew each other from doing podcasts together. And so we're all just bullshitting. We're talking about censorship because, of course, this has been like a hot topic for quite a bit now in the alternative media community. And we're talking about censorship. And then we're talking about how, like, all of us as content creators, we feel unwanted, right? Like it's like big tech doesn't want our content, and fuck them, you know. And Mike's like, yeah, we're kind of like the union of the unwanted, and we were smart enough to be like, Mike, there's something there. Hold on to that name. I don't know what the fuck we're gonna do with it, but and Mike bought the URL during the conversation. He bought he's like, dude, I just bought the URL. I'm like, good. I'm like, I don't know what we're gonna do with it, but it was a great idea. So and then when we after that show, we end up text messaging back and forth, the four of us, and we're like, hey, we should get a bunch of people together, do a giant swap cast called like the Union of the Unwanted, and figure out like, okay, how do we fight back against censorship? Like gather all these people that are having issues with censorship. We had James Corbett on the call. We had this was like the first official Union of the Unwanted, and we had Ben Swan, we had Luke from We Are Change. We had so many different people on the podcast, and then after we did that show, I liked the idea of like gathering people and sharing ideas and sharing solutions and issues and just kind of brainstorming things. So and then I'm like, hey guys, how about we do this like every other week or something, you know? So and then we were like, yeah, we can call it the Union of the Unwanted. So we started doing it every other Monday, live streaming it, because that first big one was on a Monday night. So we're like, hey, we'll just keep the same time, same time and day. And then it just continued. Initially, it was just like a thing where we're like, okay, we're going to do it. We can all live stream it. We don't really know who's going to live stream it. We can all share it on our platforms. And it's kind of like everybody's show. Everybody who's involved kind of gets to share it or whatever. But then after a while, it kind of was really kind of becoming a bigger thing. And Sam was, I think, the first one who proposed like, hey, how about we make it its own show? And then we still let our participants share it everywhere. But we kind of keep it on one RSS feed, one place, so everybody knows there's one spot you can get all the episodes. So eventually, that's what we did, and it's awesome because it's a community. It's we have a Telegram. We have everybody helps each other out. You see it after the shows, like people go on each other's episodes and they help each other out. So it's really become a awesome community, and that's like kind of one thing that I'm like, I told these guys, I'm like, if it becomes its own show, I'm like really adamant about it still being open source for our participants, because I think these conversations are so important and the gathering of minds are so important that I want to get them out as quickly as possible. So a lot of times you'll see I'll have somebody on my show as just a guest, and then I'll soon after invite them on the Union of the Unwanted to get them more exposure. I did that recently with Craig Salmon Sawyer, who did the Contraland documentary, and I've done that with a couple guests where I'm just like, hey, come on the Union of the Unwanted. All these content creators are going to be exposed to your work. Many of them who aren't even on the show, they listen to the show even if they're not on. Truthzilla will listen to it. Monica from Propaganda Report will listen to it even if they're not on. And then we can expose you to all these content creators who will also talk about the show on their own platform. So it's really like you're turbocharging the message and the conversations. And throughout the years, I'm nice to everybody. I mean, that's just how I am in my personal life. Also, I try to get along with everybody as much as possible. And throughout the years of podcasting, since like 2013, and once I started getting guests on, I've had so many people from the left, from the right, libertarians, Marxists. I mean, whoever. And even like people who don't agree with each other in like the 9/11 community or the JFK assassination community, and I'll entertain anybody's ideas if I feel like they're sincere and there's something there. And so I've done a good job of like networking and getting to know people. So once we started doing the Union of the Unwanted, I just started little by little kind of using my contact list to invite people on, and people really enjoyed the fact that they didn't know who the hell was going to be on from one episode to another. I love there's some stories. Like I shared one funny story about the Union of the Unwanted prior to recording, but here's another one is we had Dr. Christopher Ryan, who's the host of Tangentially Speaking. He's been on my show. I'm a big fan of his. I've been listening to him for a long time and love his book, Civilized to Death and Sex to Dawn. He initially, I was trying to get him on because I figured he's a really interesting person that I'm a fan of that could bring a different perspective to the show. Because I always concern myself with like it becoming an echo chamber. I don't want too many people who agree with each other, and nobody who's going to challenge ideas a little bit, because I think that's healthy. And that's how, like, if where you stand was really well thought out, you should be able to defend it. You should be able to defend it and still come to the same conclusions. So finally I got Chris Ryan to say that he was going to join us on one, and he ended up joining the call. He saw all these faces, got cold feet, and hung up. And so what I did when I edited the video, because I'm like, oh, maybe nobody's going to believe me that I convinced him to actually at least come on the show. And I actually edited it by making sure I got the part of the video where you see him for a second. I have to remember which episode it was. So one of our Union of the Wanted videos, if you click on it right in the beginning of the episode, you'll see Christopher Ryan on the bottom of the screen for like 3 seconds, and then he disappears. And so I think maybe some of his concern was, especially like right before the election, tempers were very high. People were very passionate. The show kind of started sounding like an echo chamber, but that's because like we didn't all agree on the same things, but we all agreed with what we should be fighting for and what we wanted. And I think that's like something I keep saying. I'm like, we're all on the same team. Like if we're fighting for the same issues, like regardless, like if we disagree on this specific detail or that specific detail, we're on the same fucking team. And like, you know, I've said it in the past, I'm like, okay, so the liberals, for example, during the Iraq war, when I was very anti going to Afghanistan and the Middle East stuff, they happen to be, you know, on the same side I was on that issue. I'm okay with that. Like if you're fighting for the same thing, I'm okay. And now I'm like, if people on the right or are fighting for the same things, like, you know, the vaccine freedom and a lot of these what now have become like more conservative issues, I'm okay with that too, you know. So it's just like, to me, it's like this idea of letting somebody's political ideology or what color they are, red or blue, basically influence your decision on any specific issue, like that's dangerous, you know. So we try to do, you know, I had Greg Palast on one of the Union of the Wanted shows, which you know, he's kind of very well known in the left for being a left-leaning journalist, and he's been on Democracy Now! A bunch, and really, like, he's done some really good work. It's obvious that he has a political slant, but so does Abby Martin, and I love Abby Martin. You know, she as long as you're honest, that when the time comes to expose somebody from your party, that you do it, you know, then I'm okay with like just disagreeing with, you know, like, hey, do you believe that the economy should be more socialist or more capitalist or whatever? Like, you know, if you lean one way more than I do or another way more than I do, I'm okay with that, you know, as long as we're honest and we can all, you know, we don't get extreme, right? Because I think extremism, regardless of what it is, can be dangerous. You know, it can blind you from actually searching for truth, for finding truth. You know, I did a Ricky Rants and Rockfin episode about like ideology versus philosophy and how important philosophy is, because philosophy is the pursuit of answers. You're like constantly questioning things, and you basically never really come to any real conclusions. Like the same questions in philosophy have been asked over and over and over again and never really come to any real conclusion on which is the correct answer to these questions. And I like that, because that means that you continue thinking, right? And then ideologies is almost like this, you stop thinking. Like once you reach a ideology that you like, you're like, okay, I'm putting my flag here, this is where I stand, this is what makes the most sense to me. And once you do that, I think intellectually you're kind of stunting your growth. You know, you're stopping any progression, because now you defend that team, that team that is that ideology, instead of saying like, okay, this makes the most sense right now, but let me take in more information, let me keep searching for searching for answers for these questions. And if it leads me to the same places, then that's okay. But don't let me say that like I'm done searching, you know. So I think that's why alternative media is so important, because it does let people search for different perspectives and different, just seeing things that are against the mainstream narrative. And because if people don't find your podcast, my podcast, if they don't find people who are asking these questions, they're just going to assume everything they're told is true. They're going to assume that the way that people are telling you the world works is the way the world works, when the truth is it's much darker, it's much more evil, and there's much more going on below the surface.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Now, how long do you think until they start censoring this? Like,
Well, it's funny that Matt brought up Patreon, because something that I've been talking to a couple of the other Patreon supporters recently is looking for other things to use besides Patreon, because a lot of people are upset about Ryan from The Last American Vagabond. Whitney Webb was just we're in a Telegram together, and she was talking about some issues with Patreon. So a lot of people are like, dude, I'm boycotting Patreon. I'm not using Patreon anymore. I'm gonna stop using Patreon. I want I want to use other alternatives. I mean, I almost feel like big tech, they're all in cahoots together. I mean, that's even like with Rockfin. Like, I've talked to some of the other guys. I'm like, I love what Rockfin's doing. Yeah. My only concern about Rockfin is the fact that like they're great businessmen, and they seem to be more influenced by the fact that alternative media needs a home and they can kind of give us a home than they are influenced by the same things we're influenced, the content creators, the fact that we care about this information. I don't know, maybe that's changed, but I know like initial conversations, I kind of felt like, okay, they will they defend us till the end of time? Will they never sell out? But I'm like, I guess you could say that about any platform, like there's always a chance that money gets involved or some other interest gets involved, and somewhere that you feel safe isn't safe anymore. I mean, even Parler, with all the money they have behind them, and they have huge funds behind that company, they got attacked, and they, it was hard for them. It was almost made impossible for them to come back. Now they are back, but it's like anybody can be attacked and taken down, or anybody can have financial reasons to censor something, So I think right now the good thing about Rockfin is that regardless if they're motivated by helping content creators that are spreading truth, or they're motivated by the fact that content creators who are spreading truth need a home and they have that niche in their company, it's a spot that we feel safe. We feel like, okay, we can go there. They're not censoring anything, because that's their niche. Their niche is like, all these other places are censoring people except us. We're not censoring anybody. So for the time being, I like supporting them. I do think that it's awesome that so many people are going there and having positive experiences. I haven't been there that long. I know Whitney Webb, Ryan Christian from The Last American Vagabond, Jason Burmas. A lot of these guys have been there longer than I have, and I've been kind of like holding out a little bit. But the more places you're at, the better. I think that you shouldn't put. I like that, like you guys are doing. Go to Odyssey, go to library, put your stuff as many places as possible. So if they take you down somewhere else, you can find it in another spot. So it's to me that's super important. This censorship issue is really just one of the most important issues in general, because regardless if you're into the cult, if you're into 9/11, JFK, if you're into the battles with Big Pharma and the corruption and conspiracies there, whatever issues you're into, the censorship will affect your ability to research any of that. So, it really influences all of us. So it's like, it's everybody. And this is the thing, you fight, and I'm sure you guys have heard me say this, you fight, bad ideas with good ideas. You don't suppress ideas. And to me, people have to get that through their head that like, hey, right now they're affecting people that you don't like, but eventually they're going to censor people you do like, and then by then it's going to be too late, and they're going to have too much power, and nobody fought back, and there's going to be nobody to defend you. And that's why you see people like Grimerica, No Agenda, even we've talked about with the Union of the Unwanted, like finding ways of like completely, and James Corbett's done it, like having your own servers, doing everything on your own where you're not dependent on anybody. But it's super expensive. When it comes down to that type of stuff, I'm super retarded. I don't really, I don't get most of it. It's like, I try to have conversations with people. I'm just like, I'm just one of those people, like, I love to create and I love having these conversations. It sucks that we can't just, like, to me, like, that tells you where we've gone, because it's like, to me, it sucks that somebody like you guys or somebody like me who just wants to talk about what's on their mind and talk about topics that are interesting and maybe controversial, but having honest discussions about anything and everything. It sucks that like we can't just do that and just put it out on platforms that already exist. Like that we have to be like now we have to learn tech. Now we have to learn how to, we have to have the same, IQ of a hacker in regards to tech to be able to like put what seems to be so dangerous, of information out there, when really all we're doing is asking questions and researching. And in many cases, like Whitney Webb was talking about today in that Telegram message, was she's like, everything that they're telling me was like medical misinformation or disinformation, or whatever they want to call it, was by medical people. It was like people who were in medicine. And it's like, so why you're not, it's not because it's misinformation. It's because it's not the doctors that you like. It's not the doctors that are regurgitating the mainstream narrative. So, this whole idea of like, oh, well, we're protecting people or whatever. It's like, it's nonsense, So for me, like this censorship issue is huge, because if I started my podcast today, like I know you guys did not too long ago, if I would have a much harder time researching the topics that I've researched, and and going down those rabbit holes that even motivated me to eventually start a podcast. And luckily podcasts seem to be the place where censorship is the most minimal. You don't see as much of it, and or at least it's not as blatant. Maybe we're all getting way more downloads than we should. Maybe we're all not getting, suggested our material to other people who are looking for similar type of podcasts the same way that we should. But at least, if somebody hears about the show, they can subscribe to it and it's there, and nobody's stopping them from doing that. Now, the problem is, how do you get new people to be exposed to this stuff? That part of it might be that's the place where they're really still censoring and suppressing information. And it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm glad that the Union of Unwanted kind of spawned out of that to help fight back. But every day it's getting worse, like I said, with Patreon, and who knows what's next. It might be PayPal, might be just Google in general. You might not even let you have a Gmail account if you say anything that goes against the grain.
Oh, it's absolutely unbelievable, the amount of censorship, especially within the like you mentioned, in the truth community, and what everybody's going through. It's unreal. Your show, Ripple Effect. We talked a lot about Union of the Unwanted, but your show, Ripple Effect, man, your guest lineup is like you mirror. I was telling him the other day, you mirror Rogan's podcast with a lot of the guests that you get on. It's absolutely unbelievable. What kind of, and I'm only asking because I want to know, because we're trying to grow this podcast thing, is what kind of effort are you putting into this every week to line up these guests and come up with the interview? Interviewing must be second nature to you right now, right? Because you're well 300 episodes in. And
yeah, it's funny. You still, it's. Maybe it's a school system, but we all, well, not all of us, but at least I still have some insecurities about holding a conversation. When the school system tells you you're an idiot, sometimes it's still deep rooted in your subconscious where you will have doubts. Okay, maybe, who am I to have this conversation with this PhD or this professor or this best-selling author on a topic they spend their whole life researching, and who am I? So you do get that what is it called? Imposter syndrome from time to time, where you're who the fuck am I? Why do people want to talk to me or whatever? But in time, you feel much more comfortable. Once you talk to people, and knock on wood, I've been very lucky that the majority of people are people that I would invite back on, and I liked, and we had very pleasant conversations, probably 99% of the people. And so it's helped, because once you talk to these people, and once you're sharing ideas, and you realize oh, these people are nice, they're cool, they don't care about my background, my resume. One, I don't give it to them because I don't have one. I don't have a resume, but so they might, who knows what their first impression is, or who they think I am. But what's helped is I had a lot of really nice people that were willing to come on, and then I would kind of build it. And one, it made me feel more comfortable talking to people that I felt like are much smarter than I am. And the fact that okay, they can be smart, but it doesn't mean that I can't contribute to the conversation. It doesn't mean that I can't hold a conversation with them. And then I would just kind of build that resume, and then people would know that okay, I don't go into the conversations with any agenda. I'm sincere. I will challenge myself. I will challenge the guests at times, slightly, you know, just and in a playful way, you know, in a way of like, okay, that doesn't make sense. Let's expand on that, you know, and then people just kind of, I guess the word got out that like, okay, I'm a pretty good show to come on and to promote something, and but really it was those initial guests. I mean, Jason Burmis was one of my first guests ever. There was what the hell?
He's great.
Yeah, he's awesome. Daniele Bignelli, James Corbett, Douglas Ruskoff, Dr. Brzezinski. I'm trying to think who else, like some CJ Wurdelman. I mean, there were so many like awesome guests really, really early on the show that I was just super great. Oh, Dan Carlin, Lee Camp, who I just had Lee Camp on recently again. And talking about progressives that are being censored. Lee Camp's being censored. The Convo Couch, which is like a left-leaning kind of a show on YouTube. They've been suppressed on YouTube and flagged. So now, you know, they're even coming after people that you think agree with them. But
what are they being suppressed for, though? They're left leaning. That seems to fit.
The thing is, what people are realizing that it has nothing to do with like political ideologies. It has to do with like, are you going against big pharma? Are you going against the military industrial complex? Like, you know, that doesn't change, you know, regardless. You know, people on the left and people on the right. You know, you look at Fox News, for example, or you watch MSNBC, or you watch CNN. Every other commercial is a pharmaceutical drug commercial, and sometimes you see multiple drug commercials in a row. That means that they're paying the salary of the people who are giving you the news, which means they have influence on the people who are giving you the news, which makes you wonder, are they really giving you the news? You know, it's like, it's just one of those things where it's so obvious. I mean, while I'm at the gym, if I'm at the airport, if I'm anywhere where they have mainstream media on the TVs, I watch, and literally the only commercials that I ever see are pharmaceutical commercials. And it's like, people don't see this as a issue. Like, we're one of two countries in the world that let pharmaceutical companies do this. It's us and New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And none of the other countries do it. Why? Because they understand how dangerous that can be. When you have, pharmaceutical companies marketing their products, one, it kind of gives you, I think it was, I'm not a huge fan of Bill Maher, but he did have a quote that was pretty good where he said that when you ask your doctor for drugs, instead of your doctor telling you what drug to take, your doctor becomes your drug dealer. And it's true. Like, you know, the same way you go to a drug dealer and you say, hey, I need this, or I'm looking for this. That's basically what we're doing now. It's like, oh, I saw this on TV. Can you get me this? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, so it's a huge issue. And now you're seeing even people on the left who are saying anything about big pharma or questioning the vaccine thing. I mean, I've been kind of let down by a few people. You know, some of the people that I've had on the show, which I'm super grateful have come on the show, like Jesse Ventura and others that I agree, and even Dr. Christopher Ryan, and who they kind of drank the Kool-Aid a little bit, you know, in regards to the COVID stuff. And I'm just like, you know, Jesse Ventura to me is very interesting because he made a living off questioning things and being skeptical of everything.
The FEMA camps? Didn't he like go to a FEMA camp or something?
And that episode of Conspiracy Theories was removed from like the series, and I think you could still find it on, maybe you could before 2020. I know you could. Now I don't know if you can still find it online, but you could find like, it was like the banned episode of the Conspiracy Theories show was the FEMA camps. So it's like, and he did an episode on HARP, he did an episode on all these things, and it's like, wait, but it's too hard to believe that big pharma is pushing a vaccine on you. Like, this is the part that's like too hard. I'm like, you've talked to David Icke about reptilians, and it's like, I don't know. To me, it just, I think people's hate.
That's the line, that's your line in the sentence.
Yeah, it makes no sense. I'm confused by it. I mean, it's same thing with like Dennis McKenna, and I love Dennis McKenna. The first time he was on my show, we had one of my favorite episodes ever. We went real deep into plant medicines and the pharmaceutical industry, this and that. And then the second time he was on, he and this was probably bad timing because he is obviously super left leaning, kind of a hippie left leaning, and he goes on these I don't know if you guys listen to the episode, but he goes on this like anti-trans Trump rant, and so we kind of start talking about that. I'm trying to like get him back in, and I'm just like, no, dude, it's all a illusion. You've done psychedelics. It's all a fucking illusion. I'm like, you should know that even reality's an illusion. Never mind like politics, But it's I had this guy Christian on from Connecting Minds podcast, and I was on his show too, this is like super confusing. I've been interviewed on shows that have been taken off YouTube, but yet none of my shows have been taken off YouTube. I don't get it. Like,
I was gonna say, how are you still on?
I
YouTube?
wanted to talk to you about that because you seem to be able to skirt the cancel culture.
Is it your headlines? Like if you search like Ripple Effect doesn't really have like a bad.
I think he's just an approachable guy with a guitar behind him, so he seems like super.
Like show pictures of my cute kids, and I'm like, "Don't ban me."
I'm nice.
Well, that's another thing I admire about you too, man. You get your kids involved. Your 300th episode, your daughter was up there with her own little spot on the Zoom call and everything. That's awesome, man. How's raising kids through all this crap? It's crazy, isn't it? I got 2 of my own.
How old are yours, Matt? If you don't mind me asking.
I have a 9-year-old, and I have she'll be 9 in April, and I have one that just turned 7. So,
yeah. So my boy just turned, Ricardo just turned 6 on the 19th of February. I'm actually April baby. I'm on the 19th of April.
Okay.
Which is why if you go back and you listen to my episode I did on the OKC bombing with James Corbett and then Chris Emery from Free Mind Films. Free Mind Films used to do a lot of really great documentaries. They did Psychology of Control, about the history of mind control, which is really good. Alex Jones was in there. Richard Grove, who actually helped put together the whole film. It's one of my favorite films because it goes back historically into like how the hierarchy has used psychology to control the masses. And but yeah, Chris Emery did one called "A Noble Lie" about the OKC bombing. It's one of the better documentaries on that topic. So I had him and Corbett on together to do one on that topic. And I remember telling the guys, I'm like, listen, the reason why this topic is so near and dear to my heart is because it was the day I was born, April 19th. And a lot of weird things happen around that date, as you know, like Columbine, I believe, a bunch of things happen around that date. I think they've the Boston bombing. I think they captured them on my birthday or the day after. So a lot of just historically, a lot of weird things happen on that date, and so because my birthday was April 19th, I've always been like just really intrigued because I remember being a kid and being like scared of like, they would always talk about it every year. And I'm like, so once that time came around and it would be on the news and they'd be talking about, this anniversary of the OKC bombing. And I'm like, I don't want to leave the house. I'm like, what if a building explodes? Like, I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know it was like somebody who allegedly planted a bomb and blew up a building. I thought it could happen anywhere. And it makes me think, actually, to kind of bring it back to your question, it makes me think about my kids because a lot of stuff that you don't think kids are understanding, sometimes they are. And then in other cases, a lot of things that, that maybe you think they can understand, they don't, and that can be confusing to them. So it's like this weird world we live in, where it's just like you're trying to protect them from the things that can be confusing for them, that their minds can't really comprehend at the moment, and then try to give them as normal as a upbringing as possible. But I mean, they make it really difficult with the whole mask thing, with the whole months of not interacting with other humans. I mean, I wasn't like that. I through the whole lockdown, I had people at my house every weekend, and we kind of called it the COVID crew, because it was the only friends that weren't pussies and were willing to come to my house. And I'm like, listen, I got fucking kids, man. I'm like, if I'm not worried about it, then why the hell should you be worried about it? And I would tell people, I'm like, listen, if people know that, I mean, like most parents, I love my kids, and I would never put them in any danger if I wasn't 100% sure they weren't in danger. So I was inviting people. I'm like, please bring your germs, because I'm like, kids are supposed to be exposed to germs. I'm like, I think it's unhealthy for kids to be isolated for, weeks or months at a time, you're over washing their hands, you're over cleaning everything, and then next thing you know, once they do get exposed to a virus or some bacteria that's strong, they're gonna be hit hard because they haven't been, it's just like the example I always use, it's like your muscles, like you have to work them out. If you don't work them out, they weaken. If you overwork them out, of course you can get injured, but you need to work them out. They need to stay active. So same thing with your immune system. So it was nice to have friends that were willing to come over, that like we could hang out, play with the kids. There's a handful of other parents that were eventually, not initially right in the beginning, but eventually were willing to get the kids to get together and make things as normal as possible. But in some sense, I was kind of honest with them. They're like, why is everybody wearing masks? Why is everybody freaking out about this? I'm like, because they don't take care of themselves. I'm like, they don't take their vitamins. They don't eat healthy. I'm like, we're poor because I spend all our money on organic food and grass-fed beef and whatever. And I'm like, but we're healthy. So that's why we're not freaking out about things. And so it just, it to me, that's kind of how I explained it. It was the only way I could see explaining it, where I was being honest and yet giving them some type of grasp on what was going on. And then a part of me is also like, let me not talk about it at all, because it's like they shouldn't have to deal with the stress or anxiety. And luckily, because we weren't freaking out as parents, my wife was, she trusts my research and my information and my opinions on things. And so she was cool with having people over. She was cool. She didn't fight me on any of this. And as time went by, everything kind of just proved my points that I was making a year ago, that like, it's a bad flu. If you're healthy, you're going to be fine. All these things that seemed dangerous at the time and seemed like conspiracy theorists or whatever. And so she it was a help that she wasn't fighting with me about it. There was, she didn't like the fact that everywhere we went for a long time, I would forget the masks at home on purpose, or for the kids or whatever. And she's like, can they just wear them on their chin so we don't get looks or whatever? I'm like, I don't care if people look at us, I don't care, and but it was it is. I had Rupert Sheldrake on, and we talked about this. There's a study called Inheriting Father's Fears, and it was about the study where they would get these mice and they would spray the scent that was completely synthetic, made up scent, so the mice could have never been exposed to it in the natural world, and they would spray it, and every time they sprayed it, they would shock the shit out of these mice. And so naturally, it's kind of like if you have an invisible fence for a dog, right? Like you put the collar on it that shocks them, but after a while you can just put the dummy collar, and even if it doesn't shock them, they're not going to go past that thing. So it's like similar thing where like they would spray the scent and then shock them, and then in time, every time they'd smell that scent, they would think they're getting shocked, so they would have like a panic reaction. And and the reason they were doing this is because they wanted to see if generations later, without knowing that this was a completely man-made scent that the mice could have never been exposed to or have any reason to panic after smelling it, they would spray the scent for 2 generations, the mice would have the same panic reaction. And so it was like this whole idea of like, you don't just inherit your parents sometimes eye color or hair color or certain things, but there's things that are even deeper that we could inherit, like trauma, and you could be having nightmares because your parents were having that same specific nightmare, something subconsciously, so it was really, it's really interesting. And but it also makes you wonder, like, okay, like the parents that were pregnant and dealing with, like, the ones who really drank the Kool-Aid and were freaking out about all this, how much of that stress and anxiety is that child gonna eventually have to deal with or gonna deal with? How many, even like, when kids are little, we try to do our best to not let them know when we're upset, when we're angry, but they pick up on social cues. They know they're just really intelligent. They know when we're hiding certain feelings, whatever. We like to think that they're not intelligent enough to kind of pick up on this. They might not be intelligent in regards to other things like advanced math or reading or writing, but when it comes down to social cues, when kids are born, before they really understand language and can relate messages with language and verbally, their only way of really understanding the adults or communicating with one another is social cues. So they're inherently good at picking up on social cues. So when kids are, and as we get older, we kind of lose that ability a little more because we rely much more on language verbally. But so there's so many parents that have done some serious damage to their kids because they were freaking out, and they were freaking out. They made their kids freak out. And even if they try to explain to their kids what's going on, if they're honest or sugar-coated, I don't think it matters. I think you're going to have some long-term trauma. You're going to have some long-term social issues, psychological issues. And it's not the fault of the parents, because like I always say on the show, like we're only as good as the information we're given and we have access to. And if you control that information, then you control, it's social engineering. You control the masses. You control our perspectives and opinions. And so I think a lot of people who are super freaked out were people who didn't know of the podcasts that you guys listen to, or the documentaries you guys watch, or the books that you guys have read that help you kind of see through the bullshit. And there's a lot of people who, they were going on with their everyday lives. I call it like there's an invisible war that's been going on for a long time. There's been people like us who have been complaining and preaching how dangerous, big pharma is, corporations, government, all this stuff. And everybody's like, yeah, keep doing that fucking conspiracy theory bullshit. I'm going to keep going to dinner with my wife. I'm going to keep bringing my kids to school. I'm going to keep enjoying life. Yeah. You worry about foreign policy and geopolitics. I'll just keep living my life. It's not worth my time, or ignorance is bliss, or you just didn't really see it as a important issue that was affecting you, because it didn't seem like it was that much at the time. But now it's like, oh yeah, motherfuckers, like all of us have been fighting this fight the whole time. Okay. And now you realize how important it was, because now it's seeped into every aspect of your life. It's seeped into, your kids' lives, your family's lives, your relationship with your kids and families, your work life, your play life, whatever it is, it's seeped into it, and it's having an effect on all that stuff. So if everybody was much more interested in what was really going on, and as concerned as we were about, like, just the corruption in the world, then maybe we wouldn't be here right now, But I think
I don't think we'd have businesses shut down. I think people would just say fuck it and just open it all up.
How was it in New Hampshire? What are things are things opening up a little bit now?
We're so close to the Massachusetts border that we might as well be in Massachusetts. We're about, if there's no traffic on 93, which there's none right now, we're about a half an hour shot into Boston, right down 93. So once you get further into the rural areas of New Hampshire, you still got pockets of places like the Walmarts and the things like that where you'll see people masked up in the supermarkets. People have masked up. But just from my perspective, and because of my job, I travel around the state and talking to people are living their lives as normal. And the problem that people are having right now is they're trying to work, they're trying to make money to support their families and do what they want to do. They want to go out, and they're kind of being stifled because not so much of stores being closed or restaurants being closed or anything like that. More of, oh my God, you came in close contact with somebody. Yeah. Now you're screwed for 14 days. You're not supposed to do anything. And imagine if you didn't tell your employer, hey, I got sick and I took a COVID test and now I can't come in for 14 days. And it's just, I think it's doing a toll on people's mental state more than anything, especially here in New Hampshire, because things are so, far out and spread apart. It's kind of like Western Mass, I would say, I would compare it to that. It's pretty rural out there. Then you got your pockets of cities, like close to us, we have Manchester, just like close to you have Springfield. So yeah. It's not too different. And I think it's taking a toll on people, not so much that things are shut down, because at this point they're not really anymore. It's more of the quarantine if you came into close contact with somebody and things like that.
And then November they made he didn't have a mask mandate at first, the governor, and then he made one in I think it was November.
Oh, our governor is I would consider him a cuck. He's gonna sit there and he's just gonna take whatever they throw at him. He's gonna do whatever Charlie Baker does in Massachusetts and just follow suit. The guy is
he's Charlie Baker who likes guns. Basically, is the best way to describe him.
Or he's just too afraid to do anything about the guns because he knows there's people in New Hampshire that will do something about him doing something about the guns. You know, I mean, this guy is he's deep state extraordinaire. His father was governor through the 80s. His father ended up on Bush Senior's chief of staff.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So there's pictures of Chris Sununu as a little kid, 4 years old, 5 years old, in a 3-piece suit, sitting in the governor's office and whatnot, with his dad on his lap. So he was born to be a politician. I think you'll see soon a Senate run from him, if not a presidential run. His family's got ties with a company that
the Anglo-Asian mining company.
You ever hear of them?
No, they're the Azerbaijan government is actually owns 51% stake in this, and they have to go into Armenia, and that's where they want to mine this. Was it I think
gold.
It's gold.
So they're harvesting. His company is harvesting blood gold out of Azerbaijani. And then you remember hearing about the genocide that happened in December. It was like the second Armenian genocide that happened. Mm-hmm. That was due to Anglo-Asian mining wanting to get that land that the Armenians were on in Azerbaijan. So
no, in Armenia. The
Armenian people were in Azerbaijan, and Anglo-Asian mining wanted them out of there. So because the Azerbaijani own Anglo-Asian mining, but now John Sununu, who was the governor, whose son is the governor now in New Hampshire, has a majority stake share in this company and sits on their board of directors. So it's like Azerbaijan owns 51%, and then John Sununu owns like 15%. So
I think
he's
it's
like
split
the
between like four guys on the board that own the rest of that 49% stake. But nobody even like cares.
Yeah, no.
I think he's the greatest thing.
Yeah. Oh, you'll see his Facebook page and everything. They worship him all because he likes guns. And it's like, come on, that's just the shiny object he's dangling for you. So,
and he'll give them up eventually. He won't care.
Yeah. I mean, look at us right now too. I mean, weed is legal everywhere around us, but not us. You can go to Massachusetts. I can go 10 minutes down the road into Haverhill, Mass, and there's a pot shop on the main street in downtown Haverhill.
But there's a big pharmaceutical company in our state, Lanza, I believe is the name of the company. It's in Portsmouth. I wonder if they have something to do with them not legalizing weed, because people are smoking weed, they don't need anxiety pills or they don't need whatever. Then what? They lose money. So at that point, they're not going to do it. They're going to do whatever they can to save their yacht.
Yeah, it's crazy. Our governor's,
you know what I'm saying?
Our governor's a turd. New Hampshire is, it's a great state. I would tell anybody to come and move here, but it's just like anywhere. Just be wary of what you're getting into. And I mean, you're going to go buy property. Just remember that when you buy that property, you don't own that property, because if you don't pay your taxes, your town is going to take that property right back from you. So we're at a point right now, and especially after the Capitol event on the 6th, whatever they're calling it, the riots, the insurrection, whatever the hell it is, I became completely disheartened and gave up anything that has to do with government, federal, local. You say political atheist, that's what I would call myself now, as a political atheist for sure. They're all a bunch of crooked son of a bitches, no matter where you go.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the thing is too, is like a lot of the people on the left, even though they blame everything on corporations or whatnot, they understood how dangerous government could be, because they were anti-war, which they knew that it was government trying to sell you on these unjust wars. They knew that government helped basically suppress the legalization of marijuana, and there was government in cahoots with big pharma. So it's like, to me, it's like, there's plenty of examples that government will lie to you for their own interests. They will suppress medicines that can help you, and yet, like, so many people through 2020, I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I'm like, why?
Dissonance. That's all it is.
We're allowing corporatism to become the new religion. And capitalism is a great thing, man. I got something. Do you want to buy it? Yes, I want to buy it. Okay, let's make a transaction. And that's as far as it should go. now we get into corporatism with lobbyists and all that crap, and it's a dangerous path we're going down right now, and we all need to just take a step back, I think, and become a little more self-sufficient, grow our own vegetables, raise our own food, and go down that path. Because I just don't see anything good coming out of Bill Gates owning the amount of farmland that he fucking owns right now. And it's as a chef, I'm scared. I'm not going to be, preparing bugs and protoplasm meat that comes out of a friggin' 3D printer and is designed to look like a big red slab with a white cap on top of it, and it's supposed to resemble friggin' steak. Come on, that's out of control.
Ryan from the Last American Vagabond is a chef.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's a chef. And then you ever listen to the episode I did with Pete Evans? Pete Evans is he's like one of the most famous Australian. He is like the most famous Australian chef, and he writes cookbooks and he does all of. He's a really interesting guy. You know who Pete Evans is?
I'm familiar with the name. Yeah.
He's another guy who's a chef. Really interesting guy. So it's funny. I wonder if we could do just a chef only conspiracy theory.
Let's do it. The Crazy Cooks.
It's a great name. But yeah, I mean, Pete Evans has an interesting story because he was like, he's in nutrition, he's into cookbooks and all this stuff. Real like famous household name in Australia. Then 60 Minutes they wanted to interview him about his like perspective on COVID and coronavirus and all this stuff. And they basically, what they did, they cut it up to make him look like a lunatic and to make him look like this crazy conspiracy. And it was 60 Minutes Australia. And but he was smart. He's like, I won't do the interview unless you let me record the whole interview with my own people. And then so he ended up releasing the whole interview that wasn't cut up. But he ended up getting a lot of backlash about like being a conspiracy theorist and all this stuff. Really, really interesting guy. The conversation I had with him was like phenomenal. I think it was almost like 3 hours, and it was really just fascinating. Really nice dude. Like he's just similar to like Mickey Willis when I had Mickey Willis on. Just one of those people, like you talk to him long enough, you're like, dude, they're just a really, really good person. Like it's just how can this person be dangerous? How can this person be banned and censored?
They did a number on that guy.
Who, Mickey Willis?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, same thing with Judy Mikovich. I mean, having your Wikipedia page locked, changed and locked, having your website taken down, having every video taken down. I mean, the amount of just collusion you would need to basically take down that documentary from every platform everywhere all at once. Like, I don't even know how you have the technology to even do that. Like, what type of software are you using that can find this documentary everywhere? And yet it didn't take down anything that was debunking it. And I've said this on the show, I'm sure you've heard me say it, where just like that shows you how ridiculous it is. It's not about the information itself. It's because you can watch the documentary as long as you have somebody who is narrating parts of it and telling you that, hey, this is why this is bullshit, or this is why what they said was a lie, or this is why. So it's like you can't watch the information and you're not intelligent enough to watch the information, consume the information, and come up with your own conclusions. So you can only watch the documentary if somebody is helping push the mainstream narrative into that direction and molding your perspective on what you're seeing. And so, I mean, they're basically calling us dumb. It's like, hey, you're not smart enough to watch this and decide if this is true or not. So, we're going to keep up the videos that say it's debunked, and you have some bullshit, doctor who says, oh, everything that Dr. Judy Mikovich said was a lie. I just had Aaron Marie on, who is the New York hospital whistleblower.
Yeah, great episode, man. Great episode.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, she's awesome. But same thing with her. Like, I remember when her video first went viral, the perspective on the pandemic, I think was the name of the documentary that went viral. And she, I see these debunked videos, which you still find on YouTube. And you watch the debunked videos, the stuff that they're debunking is so ridiculous. Like, it's like so minuscule. It's like little things that you're like, wait, that can be interpreted differently, or that can be subjective. It's like, it's such not. And then they'll use quickly in the videos of, oh, she's known as being an anti-vaxxer. She's known as being a conspiracy theorist. They did
labels on there.
Yeah, because the second you hear those terms, you're like, okay, this person's not credible, and too often people just don't think for themselves. And to me, like I keep saying, it's not it's not their fault because it's gotten so hard to find that information. If you know nothing about Float, Odyssey, if you don't know which podcasts to look up, and you or BitChute, and you just go to your basic search engines like Google or YouTube, and you look up, okay, people dying from the COVID vaccine, or you look up, okay, Del Bigtree show or whatever, you're just not going to find these things. So anybody that is going against the grain and has a different perspective, you can't find. So what you do end up watching is the videos that are regurgitating the things that, you know, you're seeing on TV. Then you're like, okay, well, I did my research. It seems like what the TV said was right. And I guess these other people are crazy because I can't even find this stuff that they're referring to. It's like, well, you can't find it because it's being suppressed, and that alone should tell you something. And not everything that is suppressed is because it's 100% factual, but I think in many cases that's been what's been happening. Where just like anybody who, you know, they're being. I just don't even understand the logic in people thinking that they're only suppressing stuff that is wrong or incorrect. Like the fact that we know politics and corporations have huge influence, big tech have agendas, and yet you think like there couldn't possibly be some suppression of information. I mean, just our long-term memory is just so horrendous. I mean, I used to say this in regards to wars because it's like we would talk about Vietnam, and then like, you know, Iraq came around and we're like, yeah, let's go to Iraq, you know, and it's like this will be for the, you know, a just cause, and then Iraq happens, we're like, okay, we fucked up there. Obviously, we were lied to about all that stuff, you know, and I mean, scientists that are looking for the chemical weapons and looking for weapons of mass destruction end up having mysterious deaths, and there are so many cover-ups and lies. But now let's go into Syria because I'm sure they're telling us the truth now. It's like we just forget. We don't learn history, and it repeats over and over again because we don't learn it. And when you look at, like, you know, COVID, it's almost a perfect. If anything, we should learn now. And I was just thinking about this recently, and I was gonna talk about it on my next Ricky Rants and Rockfin, about how the COVID thing. So something that the conspiracy theorist world has been saying for a while, because people are like, well, you know, how do you justify the, you know, polio, right? We resolved polio and all these things because of vaccines. And a lot of us who've done research, we find people who are saying that actually those numbers were already on their way down. And those numbers were on their way down. And then when the vaccine was given out to people, those numbers were already curving down. And it was just a matter of time before it was herd immunity, and it wasn't an issue anyways. So you're giving the vaccine the credit when that's complete bullshit. The vaccine wasn't the reason why those numbers were going down. Those numbers were going down way before that vaccine was even given out to mass amounts of people. And, you know, so you hear, you know, and I've known this information for a long time, but I've always, you know, I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, how do we know for sure that's really what happened? I'm like, how do we know that that's, you know, that the numbers are going down? Where are these numbers coming from? I like to question even my own beliefs. My first instinct is, without a doubt, that debunks the whole polio vaccine bullshit and narrative. Without a doubt, like, that makes perfect sense to me. The numbers are already going down, but can I be sure of it? I don't know. Now 2020 happens, and now 2021 happens. Numbers are going down. They're giving credit to the vaccine, and I'm like, holy fuck. Now that polio thing seems way more believable now, because I'm like, we're living through it. We're living through, like, the fact that we know for a fact that this was bullshit, that the PCR test obviously was giving false positives. People were, you know, they're calling things cases, which didn't mean jack shit, because, like, the majority of people were fine. People weren't dying from this, and they were dying from other things, and are labeling it as a COVID death. All these things, and yet people will look back at history one day. They'll look at 2020. You know, if Google still exists, if YouTube still exists, they're going to use Google and YouTube to search what, you know, I talked about this with somebody recently about my kids. I'm like, if my son grows up and one day is like, dude, I just remember 2020 being such a crazy fucking time. Like, let me do some research and find out, like, what was going on then, or, like, you know, what's some of the news that happened then, and what are the perspectives and opinions and on what happened then. All they're going to find is the mainstream narrative, when there was tons of people like ourselves who didn't believe the bullshit, were saying, you know, what was really going on, and though our voices are being muted, our voices are being muffled. And when people look back at history and they do their research, if they find an article by CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, CBS, whatever it may be, or New York Post, whatever, New York Times, Washington Post, they're going to find the articles that are regurgitating the propaganda and lies. And what they're not, so what they're doing by suppressing alternative voices, they're not just suppressing alternative voices right now and not just suppressing people's ability to be exposed to what's really going on now, but they're suppressing it forever, because people in the future who do research are going to go back and they're not going to be able to find us, and they're not going to be able to know what was really going on. So when I look back at history, I always think of those things too. Like, okay, this was like the mainstream narrative, but I wonder how many conspiracy theorists, people who were going against the grain, said, no, that's actually a bullshit story that the media put out, or that's a bullshit story, or that's a bullshit story, or Big Pharma is pushing this narrative and that's not what happened. So that's something we all have to think about. And this, again, it brings it all back to why the censorship issue is so important. James Corbett did a video called Burning the Library of Alexander, something along those lines. And I remember like, oh, that title is perfect. And it's so relevant right now, because like, that's what they're doing by censoring all these people. That's what they're doing by removing all these people from YouTube or making it impossible to find their websites or whatever. They're burning the library. They're like, no, you can't. What's that?
Digital book burning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
modern day book burning, and it's not just modern day book burning. It's the thing that scares me the most about what's happening right now is the global nature of it. Like you talked about, Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction, and that just seemed to kind of be isolated to the United States and us trying to do whoever's making the money or wants to make the money to start the wars and what setting that up, I guess. This, you got the UN involved, you got the WHO involved, you got the International Monetary Fund involved, you got all these people pushing masks. The global ramifications of this are what scares me, and this is truly a global event. It doesn't just affect us here in America, and I can't even imagine where the hell we're headed to right now with this, and that's super scary. I hate to get a little black pill on this one here, and I want to talk about us, like I said before, growing food, and we have to worry about one another. And I always say on the podcast here about what's in our walls is what we need to worry about. But those global ramifications really friggin' scare me. They've suppressed the Yellow Vest movement. Hong Kong was friggin' rising when China was taking back Hong Kong from Great Britain. It was just, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess right now. They've suppressed everything globally, and they're doing it very deviously too.
Yeah, we haven't done things to this scale before, but the Iraq War actually, it is kind of similar, because you think about it, right? Because that's something that I'm sure you guys get a lot when you question like what's going on. People are like, "Oh, so every country was in on it," And I'm just
the number one thing,
yeah, you get that all the time, and I'm like, when you think about it, the Iraq War, for example, right? If everybody's getting their information from the same people, it's easy to control everybody, so during the Iraq War in the UK, guess what? They were getting the same bullshit propaganda that the US people were getting. That's why the UK was right on it. They were, they're right there with us. We're getting involved in every war because they're being fed the same propaganda. You look at most of the world, especially Western Europe, Spain, France, whoever, everybody was being fed the same propaganda. So they were basically all on board. If we have to do that, because if we didn't get people on board, then next thing you know, there'd be another world power that says, hey, you're basically invading a country for no reason. We have to come together and stop you. But it shows how, like, if you get a small, first of all, it shows the influence of America, because really they have influence everywhere, but also shows the influence of like you said, in modern day, the WHO and these world organizations, the UN, whatever it may be. I mean, these people, they forget, like, these organizations aren't exclusive to the US. Like, so when everybody is getting, all these countries all over the world are getting information from the WHO, like, if you control the information to who's giving out, you control all these countries and their perspectives on what's going on, So it's it's kind of like the equivalent of like, you know, having a central bank. Like you give this one bank so much power that of course bad things are going to happen. It's same thing with like you give the WHO or like these handful of doctors or experts all this power and everybody goes to them for the information. Then of course everybody's going to have the exact same basically outcome in regards to, well, you know, they're saying that we have to shut things down, that, you know, then and this country's doing it and that country's, I mean, it's a domino effect. You know, it's same thing with like you saw in America with sports, you know, or whatever, you know, like one person shut down, then another person was worried that like, okay, I don't think this is that serious, but for PR reasons, for political reasons, I should shut down or I'm going to look like I'm not a responsible person who cares about people. So I'll shut down. And it became this domino. And same thing with the countries. The countries were the same thing. You know, they're given tests, they were given false positives. They were told that this is life or death. Everybody who got it was going to die. And they didn't know that for sure. They also were told that their hospital is going to be overrun. So nobody knew for sure if that's what was going to happen. But if all these higher powers were telling them that it's what's going to happen, and they were preparing for this onslaught of busy hospitals and people dying, then they wanted to be ahead of the curve, especially if you're a politician or you're a government. If you're a government, you're like, well, we don't want to wait till the hospitals are completely overrun and we can't control it. Let's try to be responsible and try to, you know, do what these other countries are doing. So it became this domino effect where everybody got on board. And when you look at it from that manner, you know, especially when governments are run by politics and politics care about public perception, they don't want blood on their hands. You know, it doesn't, not too many politicians like a Trump or a DeSantis or, you know, over there in Texas, Abbott, have the balls to say like, hey, you know what? I'm like, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to push back a little bit. You know, most governments are going to be, and not just that, there's people who are getting money. I forget which African country was allegedly offered tons of money in federal aid and then refused to take it if they kind of, you know, went along with the mainstream narrative.
Yeah, I remember that made the news for like a brief second and just kind of went away. Yeah, unreal, man.
But that's the thing about all these dots, like, right? This is the problem with like this story being a year long in 2020, because it's like you're being force-fed mainstream narrative, mainstream narrative. And then even like, so I'm talking about like the normies perspective. Like you're watching the news, then maybe they see something you shared on your social media, and then like, oh yeah, that seems weird, right? And then force-fed propaganda, and then you see like my story, and then you see like another story that doesn't make sense, another story that doesn't make sense, and then it takes somebody like Mickey Willis or a James Corbett or whoever to gather all these dots and put them all together and realize like, holy shit, there is, you know, when I'm only seeing these stories from time to time, I forget how much evidence there is that we're being lied to and it's bullshit. But once you put it all together, you realize like, I don't even understand how anybody can believe this crap. Like how, like there's been so much, but I think, you know, the average experience is, okay, I see this little story, then I see that little story. But if you're if you're spending more time consuming the mainstream narrative than you are the alternative narrative, then, you know, you're just going to kind of move on. You know, you're going to see it and you're like, okay, yeah, maybe. And then you're going to, but, you know, the TV's saying this, or Dr. Fauci's saying that, or Dr. Fauci's saying wear 2 masks and a condom. You know, it's like, it's
a nasal swab. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so it's like, it's so, you know, people, and then the fact that he lied, I still talk about it because it's like so ridiculous that people are accepting of the fact that of his explanation to why he told people they didn't need masks. Like, it's such a ridiculous explanation. If you truly believed covering your face was going to save lives, you could, and if you really believe that this was the epidemic thing that, you know, that he was selling us on, then why wouldn't you just tell people like, use a rag, rip a old shirt, cut off a sleeve off a shirt and put it over your face? You know, everybody should try their best to have their face covered of all time. Like, and you could easily say like, hey, don't go out and buy the masks, you know, or say, hey, we're saving the N95 masks for only exclusively for, you know, frontline responders and workers, and we're not going to give that to the public, but the public, use a shirt, use a neck gaiter, use whatever you want. And the fact that he doubled down on the fact, like, no, you know, like, because whoever was interviewing said like, hey, are you sure people are listening? Are you sure people don't need to wear masks? He's like, yeah, no, people, average person doesn't need to wear a mask, and it's like, and then people believe, oh, he just didn't want a shortage. They were asking for fucking ventilators like crazy. And it's like, and for the most part, they got that done. And that's much more expensive and much harder to build. I'm like, a mask, like how hard would it be to fucking make more masks if we really needed a global effort to save lives? It's like, it's because he was being honest. It was bullshit. And then it became a political thing. And because it became a political thing, now we have to double down on it. It's so what just like they can't let go of the fucking Russiagate thing. Like people still think that there's some, collusion or whatever.
Yeah.
They can't let go of the mask thing because politicians aren't good at admitting when they're wrong, and they double down and they'll just stick to their guns that Trump wasn't taking it seriously enough. And there's blood on his hands and this and that. It's like, well, nobody's saying that there's blood on Biden's hands because supposedly people are still dying of COVID. Like, it's political. It's all fucking political. And the worst part is that it happens every election year. People get so caught up into it. And to me, like what I kept telling people this election year, I'm like, listen, I don't give a fuck where you stand on drugs, on religion, on anything. I'm like, there's one issue this year that's the most important. That's like, there's one president that could make things worse, and there's another president that could make things better. And I'm like, let's get our lives back, and then we can argue about all the other things later. I'm like, let's just get, let our kids go back to school. Let's get rid of these fucking masks that are just literally picking up germs everywhere we put it because it's in our pocket. We can't go anywhere without a mask. So you're concerned about being stuck, without a mask. So you have them in your car, you have them in your pocket. Girls have them in their purse. They have them all over the place, picking up germs. That's near your phone in your pocket, which is super dirty because phones are, we touch everything, then touch our phone. We never clean our phones. Nobody ever cleans their phone.
Let's be real about this one. People take dumps while they're looking at their phone if they're not washing their phone after. So forget about touching it and just getting germs on it. The phones are filthy.
Yeah, phones are filthy. And then you're putting that mask that is touching that phone on your face. Yeah. So it's like, if anything, if your face is like the best way of getting sick via viruses, you're literally making it easier to get sick via viruses. When I had Dr. Judy Mikovich on the Union of Unwanted, she's convinced that that's a part of the plan. Yeah. Get people more sick and then get them to want and think that they need the vaccine. So that seems realistic. That seems like it makes sense to me. It's you get people breathing in a bunch of carbon dioxide and not feeling that great, and then maybe you're more likely to want to get the vaccine because it's like, oh, I don't feel good, I don't want to get more sick. So that kind of does make sense. But nobody's asking the question like, how much research do we have on breathing in the amount of carbon dioxide that somebody like my wife is, who if she works a double at the restaurant she works at, she has to have that mask on the whole time. She's breathing in way more carbon dioxide than she should or would be if she didn't have a mask on. And where's the research on that? Like they reference research that shows, the viruses, it doesn't spread viruses. Okay, well, fuck the viruses. Okay, we can argue that. But what about the carbon dioxide? Like, in so many cases, people only look at the information that defends their perspective, and they won't look at anything else that will kind of debunk their perspective. So it's so much, and in so many cases, the way people are asking us to fight the virus and make the world better and safer and prevent deaths are causing other harms that they don't want to discuss. So they don't want to discuss the fact that, the killing of small businesses also leads to alcoholism, child abuse, self-medicating with prescriptions, anxiety increases, depression increases, all this stuff, all the financial issues for the average person. I know people, because I'm in construction, I know a lot of people go on unemployment every winter. I was just talking to somebody today where he was saying that he knows people who've been laid off late last year and still haven't got paid on unemployment, and why? Like, it's fucking COVID related. It's COVID related because Massachusetts, because of the building, the city hall being shut down, all the city halls and town halls being shut down. There's nobody going through the mail. There's nobody, there's a lack of staff. Everybody's working from home, and there's been so much fraud with unemployment because of COVID and all the people going on unemployment because of the shutting down of businesses, that they're doing like all these extra steps to get your unemployment, and so they're making you do extra steps, but they're less staffed, and there's nobody at City Hall or Town Hall to get any mail that might be necessary to go through these extra steps. Like now they make you in Massachusetts send like all these different just copies of your identification, because they want to make sure it's you. So you have to send a picture of your license, a picture of some mail that came to your house to prove that it's your address, all this stuff. And a lot of people, like older people, older Portuguese people, Polish people that I know that work construction, Italians, they're not too computer savvy, so they're sending it in snail mail, and they send it in snail mail. Then they call unemployment weeks later, and they're like, "What's going on? Like, I haven't got paid. I still have bills." And they're like, "Oh, we're still like 3 months behind in opening mail. So if you send it snail mail, you're just shit out of luck. You just gotta wait." And so it's like all these issues, and not to quote Donald Trump, but it's true. Like, you can't have the way you fight the virus be worse than the virus, and it is, and nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody wants to talk about the virus, and and they want to ignore the fact that all these methods that we're using to possibly fight some virus that now is kind of accepted is a bad flu. They don't want to talk about all the other negative effects, so it's to me, it's like they should be open to explore all these things. And when they're not, then it's obvious that their opinions aren't motivated or influenced by information. It's tribalism. You're just defending your team. It's about defending your team. It's about your ideology. It's about you hating the president so much that all logic goes out the fucking window. I mean, what happened to the race issues? Like, is race over? Like, race issues over? Like, if you truly, and of course there's always going to be race issues and discrimination in every country. Okay, the Portuguese discriminate the Northerners and the Southerners. If you're from, and then if you have people from the islands, they discriminate against them a little bit. You have Italians with the Sicilians and the mainlanders. You have African American community where you have the blacks that are, if you're darker or you're lighter, or if you're mixed or not mixed. Like, there's discrimination everywhere. Okay, I'm all for maybe making it less worse, but don't pretend it's like all resolved now. That, like, don't pretend it was at, like, discrimination and racism and stereotypes were at its worst because of the president, and now that he's gone, they're all resolved. Like, because nobody's talking about defunding the police
every time. Like, that's how it always is. When before Trump was in, when Obama was president, you didn't hear anything about it, and then Trump gets in. Now all of a sudden it builds up, and then he gets out and it goes away.
Well, it's funny because it's like we had such a racist president, and then it's like, and I'm like, yeah, if we only could get a black man in office to fix all these race issues. Oh, wait, we did for 8 years. I'm like, why do these issues still exist during the Trump administration? I'm like, they should have been resolved already. It's like, because it's political fucking theater. Because none of these guys, first of all, they only care about brown people here. How about brown people over fucking seas? We bomb brown people. I'm like, where's all the brown? Let's do signs that brown people matter overseas. Like, those lives matter. If it is about Black Lives Matter, and I'm all for that. I'm all for Black Lives Matter, white lives matter, all lives matter. And I do understand the argument that, like, the reason why they would get mad about people saying all lives matter is because, in a way, it was like minimizing what they were trying to say, and maybe and not in all cases were people saying when they would say Black Lives Matter, they weren't saying that white lives didn't matter. I mean, there's reasonable people on all sides of these debates. So there's reasonable people who are like, yeah, no, I'm not saying white people don't matter. I'm just saying that right now it seems like black people their lives seem less significant or less important than a white person. So we just want to let people know that, like, hey, yeah, Black lives do matter, and they matter equal or as much as anybody else's life. And if you were making that argument, I'd be like, absolutely, like, I'm all for that, But in many cases, it was almost like reverse racism was being accepted, where it was like, and that's the part that, and these are the discussions we aren't supposed to have, right? We aren't supposed to talk about racism unless I invite a black friend on to talk with us. But it's just one of those things where like I have a lot of black friends. I mean, I have, you know, I grew up playing basketball. I mean, literally like, you know, hours and hours of you know, of every week goes with me interacting with my black friends. You know, we play ball together. We hang out. I mean, you know, I had black friends at my wedding. I mean, to me, like, I could care, and I don't even feel right even saying that I have black friends, because I'm like, I could care so little about race. I'm like, that it doesn't fucking matter to me. Like, I don't care. I'm like, are we into the same thing? I'm like, I have friends that are Muslim. I have, you know, friends that are Christian. I have friends that are Catholic. I have friends that are atheists. I'm like, I don't care what you are, what nationality you are, whatever, you know, whatever it may be. If we get along and we have some interests that we can chat about and kind of come together on, I'm like, and that's why sports, and before it became really political, but soccer, even though there is some racist issues still in soccer, for the most part, the average fan, the beautiful thing about soccer is that it doesn't just break race, it breaks nationalities, cultures, everything. I mean, you look at like Liverpool that won the Premier League last year and the Champions League. You know, some of their best players are African. Some of their best players are, you know, Muslim. You know, Salah's from Egypt. He's a Muslim. You have English players. You have, you know, whatever, Irish players, whatever. You have a little bit of everything, and they all come together for this love of this game. And that's, you know, that's the way we should look at things. Is like, to me, you know, it's almost like you can go in too far in the other direction, and you see it now, right? And when we do construction in Springfield, we have to have a percentage of the crew that's working there that's a minority, and we have the percentage that is a Springfield resident, and which is just insane, right? You know, it's just like, to me, it's like I don't unless you can prove that our crew was you know, put together because we're discriminating against somebody else, then why can't we just hire people? I mean, why can't we just hire people and not have to go through these loopholes of like, okay, now we have to go to the union hall, we have to get some freaking, you know, some schmuck. And I'm not saying it's because he's a minority. I'm just saying everybody at the union hall who's waiting around for work in the middle of the summer, white or black or Spanish, probably sucks. You know, I mean, that has nothing to do with their skin color. The white people suck too, because if it's in the middle of summer and construction jobs are going on everywhere, and you're looking for work in the middle of summer, and every year you're going through the same thing, it's because you suck. I mean, it's because you don't want to work, and then you just go back to union hall to find your work. You know, because if you're a good employee, you know, I've said it to people that we've had to hire from the union hall. I mean, when we work in the Berkshires, because the unions are like a mob. I mean, they weren't just only run by the mob; they run like a mob. And when we're working in the Berkshires, we have to get somebody from their hall, regardless if all our guys are union. We don't have non-union guys because of like being picked on and being bullied by the union. So we do it, you know, we to basically continue doing work without being harassed. And so when we go to the Berkshires, because we're from the Ludlow, Springfield area, we have to hire one of their guys, and I butt heads with them all the time. And it's just like, I'm like, you do realize how ridiculous this is, right? I'm like, our guys are union. They're laborers. They're operators in the union. So it's not like I'm cheating the union. Now I'm on your turf, so you want me to get somebody from your hall. I'm like, so I have to either let go of somebody who's been a good employee, somebody who's been you know, good to me, and I've been good to them, and we've established a relationship, and is a good worker that I don't want to let go, so I can afford to hire your idiot for the time being, or I can keep all my employees so I don't lose them, and basically lose whatever it is, $1,000, $1,200, whatever it is a week, just hiring your guy to just show up, because that's all he's going to do. He's just going to show up. And in many cases, if he does anything, he's going to just fuck things up. So it's like, I'd rather him just show up and do nothing and not touch anything and not get in the way. And it's like, who used to do that? The mob. The mob would go to, I mean, you know, I'm close to Springfield. You know, my wife's, you know, mostly Italian. We're not too detached from the mob life, and everybody knows somebody who's in the mob or has been in the mob, or, you know, is connected to the mob. I mean, you also get a lot of the Italians who, just because their last name ends in a vowel, they try to convince everybody they're in the mob. You know, that happens too. But or they talk with their hands, like, yeah, I'm connected. I'm like, sure you are, bud. But you know, so we know how it works. And anybody who's watched mob movies know, you go to a little business, you say, hey, you need to pay us for security. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, like, well, you need to pay us for security. And if they don't, you bash the place, you burn the place, you beat up somebody, whatever. And then you give them that little portion of the, you know, cut of your profit to keep them off your case, you know. And so basically when we're dealing with the unions, it's similar type of thing. It's like, if I don't give you this, you know, this money, or I'm indirectly giving you the money because I'm hiring one of your schmucks who is a huge portion of his wages are going towards your, you know, your funds and paying your salary. I have to hire this guy so you don't harass us, so you don't show up and try to shut down the job, so you don't show up and tell my employees, hey, we're protesting, we're shutting down the job, you can't work, or we're kicking you out of the union, you're losing your insurance, or you're losing. So now everybody's getting threatened to play along, you know. And so it's the mob, and the government's no fucking different. I mean, it's all, you know. I mean, we were getting emails during right before election, our business emails, saying like, hey, give money to the, you know, Joe Biden, and go to this protest, and go to this and this and that. And I'm like, this is, it's crazy. It's crazy that you know, they don't care who's running. It's like, you always got to support the blue team, you know, every time. And it's because they support them back. So it's a match made in hell.
Like, what was that sheriff that in New Hampshire? It was a guy, transgender female,
transgender sheriff,
who was like atheist, supported abortion, but ran on the Republican ticket, and she won because she's a Republican.
Yeah.
But she won and is now the sheriff of I don't know what county it is. I think it's out by like Keene.
Yeah, it's where Keene, New Hampshire is. So.
And she might know.
So what Republican perspectives issue? Because that's the thing. Like Charlie Baker, for example, he calls himself a Republican, and he's just. I'm like, what makes him a conservative? I'm like, you know, I don't. I mean, it's just the R. I mean, I don't even understand why people.
That's all it is. They're all on the same team, man. It's just an illusion. It's an illusion of choice, and they all play for the same team. And once in a while, you'll get someone who is a little different than them, and they'll cast them aside. I feel that's what happened to Tulsi Gabbard, right? She was making a name for herself, absolutely ripped up Kamala Harris in the debates, and that was the end of her. And now Kamala Harris is our vice president.
Who also called Joe Biden a racist and like said something else to him during the debates. And like all this, and it was like, well, now you're his vice president, and now you say he's going to be the best one for the job. Well, you didn't say that 6 months ago.
Yeah, Jocko Willing just had Tulsi Gabbard back on his show, and I've yet to listen to it. I just saw it pop up on my feed this morning. I'm excited to hear it. But yeah, she's an example of someone who didn't play for the same, play for the team.
And she sued Google. She sued Google or YouTube or both.
Yeah.
Because it was suppressing like her website and her information. I mean, again, it's like Tulsi's left leaning, and it don't suppress her. So it's not about blue or red. Even the people defending their teams, it's like, if you truly believe in your team, just understand that the people that you're voting for don't even believe in your team. Like, they don't give a fuck about your team. Like the Bernie Sanders camp. I mean, regardless if you agree with him or not, like, look what they did to your own candidate. Like, look what they did to him. Like, they didn't give a fuck about, the issues. They didn't care about what he believed in. They didn't care about him actually creating some change that you believed in, or push the policies that you believed in. They're like, no. He's not, he's not pro-war enough. He's not, he's not as cutthroat and willing to take money from the think tanks and the lobbyists and all that stuff. So let's make sure he doesn't win, because he's a little bit of a loose cannon, so it's, and again, and this is why I always said, like, Bernie Sanders, his fans, his people who liked him and people who liked Trump had a lot in common in regards to, like, okay, this might not be the perfect alternative, but it's a fucking alternative. I'm tired of the cookie cutter politician that tells me everything I want to hear, and then the second they get in office, they do whatever the fuck they want. And you look at Dennis Kucinich, that's why him and Ron Paul got along, because they're even though they're drastically different in maybe perspectives, they understood the corruption of politics. They understood the corruption in so much of the decisions that were being made by politics, and influenced by military industrial complex and big pharma and all this stuff. They got along. So it's like in many cases, like I keep saying, like if our enemies are the same people, who cares if we disagree on these things? And Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, who became friends and helped each other out a lot, they're perfect examples. One's a Republican, one's a libertarian. Or libertarian Republican, another one's a Democrat, and yet in many cases they agreed, And when you look at Joe Biden, I'm like, he's been around for fucking ever. He's had nothing accomplished. Anything that he has done, he's been on the wrong side of history. He's voted for every war. He's, and it's just like maybe he didn't get too much done because he was too busy smelling kids, but that's no excuse.
It's just so bizarre, those pictures of him doing that and people he knows and they're there and they're like,
the kids are like trying to squirm away.
It's
well, you got kids, so you know how I'm like. If I remember seeing that shit and I'm just like, dude, if I'm a parent, like that's creepy. I'm like, I just and I would never do that, anything close to that to anybody else's kids. I mean, I'm very cautious with other people's kids because I know how sensitive people can be with their kids. Unless it's like a close friend, I'm just cautious with the way I handle it and always try to be super polite. So for you to just be like reckless and just like put your arms around them and smell them and whisper in their ear and it's like, and the thing is those videos, like I had somebody over my house during the lockdown where we were talking about those videos. And, so I'm like, I sent it to him via text message. I'm like, hey, open the video I just sent you. And, he's like, yeah, that's not that bad. Everybody's making a big deal out of it. I'm like, yeah, but keep watching. And then he's watching. I'm like, the video's still going on, right? He's like, yeah, and it's starting to get creepy. I'm like, yeah, because if you see one video or two videos, you're like, okay, maybe it was a one-time thing. But when you see just how many videos there are of him doing the same thing and being creepy, like after a while, you're like, okay, this dude's a fucking DL creep. Like this dude is like, if this is what he's doing when he knows he's being recorded, what the hell is he doing when he's not being recorded? And when you look at like obviously the extent of pedophilia in the political world, like, listen, it's not out of the realm of possibility that one day his name might come up as one of those people that are linked to the worst of the worst.
It's just a giant spider web of everything combined, and it all needs to be blown up. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be blown up. And I think we should leave the politics side of that in that conversation at that, because I really wanted to talk to you about what kind of cigars you like, man. I've heard you mention that you like cigars, and I need to wrap this thing up on a lighter note with some cigar talk and go from there.
So I highly recommend you check out. I did a podcast with Delicia. They call her the Cigar Vixen.
Okay.
And we did a full show on cigars. And so I was looking to get like somebody on to talk about cigars. I've done one full show on bourbon also, which was really good. Was the one that
you did on cigars, was that the guy he was from like the CRA or something like that?
No, that's another one I did on cigars.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one I listened to, was the one with the guy from the CRA. That was a great episode. Yeah.
Yeah. What was his name? Glenn?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Something Lloyd, Glenn Lloyd maybe. But yeah, really nice. It's funny. We talked about lobbying, right? And that he when I meet people like him, it changes my perspective a little bit sometimes on lobbying because, like, I've had Jack Abramoff on. I've had people on to, like, talk about how it's basically fucking, like, you're legalizing corruption. You're like, hey, I can give you this politician a bunch of money in return. I get favors, or I get this language in a bill or whatever. And you're just like, okay, lobbying's bad. And then you hear things like, have that guy from Cigar Rights of America who's like, basically his organization's a lobbying organization and he goes to lobby for the tobacco industry. And you're like, okay, this is a perfect example of, like, I can't just plant my flag here and say lobbying is always bad all the time. I have to be open to, in some cases, there's going to be exceptions to that rule. And that's a perfect case of it, because I'm a cigar smoker. Massachusetts, like, banned,
anything
like,
flavored, right?
Yeah, flavor, which is so ridiculous. One of my best friends owns a smoke shop in town. And he, I remember going to bat for him when he was fighting the town of Ludlow. So he started leasing this building or this small store, this place to open up his store in Ludlow, and it's like his dream come true. He gets to have his own it's like a convenience store / smoke shop. You get everything tobacco related or whatever, and he's Lebanese, so that's what they do. They own convenience stores and smoke shops, and so he was finally gets to open his own place. He's stuck in this lease for whatever how many years, and out of nowhere Ludlow bans all like e-juice stuff, whatever the hell that shit is, vape stuff, bans even though his store is like pretty close to a basically the town line for Springfield, where you can just go right over to where I live. There's like a little bridge, go over that bridge and you can buy that stuff right over in the next town. But they ban all this stuff. They ban flavored cigars. They ban all this stuff that he was selling that went into him calculating like, okay, how much can I do in sales? Can I afford this lease? Well, if I sell this much product, I can afford this lease. Now he's like, okay, now you're banning this stuff that I sell that is a huge portion of my sales, and you're not telling me how the fuck am I going to pay my bills, because it's a huge portion of my profit. Now that's gone and I'm stuck in this lease. He said this to the town of Ludlow. He's like, if you guys get me out of my fucking lease, I don't give a fuck what you guys do. I'll just leave. I'm like, I'll go open a store somewhere else. But he's like, but you're banning this stuff and you're giving me zero solutions. You're not telling me. I mean, it's similar to like what was going on with like 2020 with the COVID stuff. It's like, hey, we're going to shut down your business. We're going to make everybody afraid to leave the house. And by the way, if you go on unemployment, you're going to have to wait a long fucking time for that check, and you're just going to have to figure it out, And so it's like they're causing the problem and not even helping with any solutions, So but yeah, I mean, and in his aspect, he's been hurt big time by like the tobacco regulations and stuff, and the whole flavored cigar thing is just ridiculous because so you have like acid's like one of the most by Drew Estates, it's one of the most popular kind of flavored or infused cigar brands.
It's fucking on a bar of soap, man.
Well, some of them are more mild, and I like. I used to like back in the day. It's a great entry cigar, so I used to get people like if people come over to the house and they're not cigar smokers. I'm like, hey, try this because it smells sweet. It has a little bit of a sweet flavor. They put some of those exotic oils in the wrapper. So, and then when you put it in your mouth, it kind of gives you a little bit of a sweetness. And so it's pleasant to smoke. They're not too harsh. They're not really. Most of them aren't full bodied cigars. So they're lighter on the lighter side. And but they're expensive. They're a little on the expensive side. They're a premium cigar. They're not a cheap cigar. And so that's the type of stuff that you're banning, because you think kids are going to smoke. Well, kids aren't going to smoke some expensive cigar. And, and if they do, who gives a fuck? Like if they smoke some expensive flavored cigar, like, to me, like, any kid who's too young to smoke probably doesn't give a fuck about cigars, and any kid who's maybe not at the age where they can buy cigars yet but want to give it a try, like I don't care. Like people get their alcohol when they're below age, under the age of buying it. So why can't, like, if people get cigars, like, you don't ban it. Like I don't see you banning alcohol because
flavored vodka.
Yeah, flavored vodka is a perfect example.
Yeah,
the people who drank whipped cream vodka are young people, or it's like,
and my wife.
And I was gonna say, and women. But, same thing with like Fireball whiskey. Like you have women and you have young people. That's because it's growing up, Jaeger was the thing that I used to drink all the time, which is why I can't drink it anymore, because I drank way too much of it and it's disgusting now. But it was like anything that you could put down easily it was your go-to. So it's like now I drink whiskey. I drink whiskey on the rocks. I drink wine. And same thing with cigars. Like you like the sweet stuff, and as time goes by, you start appreciating tobacco. You start appreciating the smells, the aromas, the taste of it, and then you're like, oh no, the sweet stuff, the infused stuff is actually masking the taste that I actually like. Same thing with whiskey. It's I don't like anything that's flavored, even wine. Like people will sometimes bring me wine that is aged in bourbon barrels. Like, oh, you love bourbon, this is a perfect gift. I'm like, no, I like wine and I like bourbon. I don't like them together, because I'm like, together I'm not enjoying bourbon, and I'm not drinking wine. Like both flavors are ruining my experience. It's like I actually like to taste the wine. I want to taste the wine, and when I'm drinking bourbon, I want to taste the bourbon. So it's that whole thing of like, it's to save the kids from it's attracting the kids. It's like cigars companies they don't even market the kids. Like, that's not, they don't market the kids. And the only cigars that would be marketed to kids, or what you would say, or something that like teenagers would buy, are stuff that they're just gonna fucking cut open and then roll weed in anyway. So it's like, it's not, they're smoking blunts. And guess what? If they want to smoke weed, they're gonna smoke weed. If they can't get the cigar, they'll just wrap it in something else. They'll just wrap it in some zigzags or something else. So it's like, you're not gonna stop kids from doing it. Making something illegal never makes it disappear. This idea of like,
more.
you create a black market, and in many cases you just make it sexier. Like, you tell kids like, don't, so one of my good friends is a detective, and he during the pill epidemic, I remember him talking about how, and I never even thought about this, but he was talking, we were hanging out at my house having a drink, and he was talking about how the news stated which type of oxycodone or whatever drug it was, street drug, that was killing people. Like, what was I forget what the street name was, but he's like, they like, oh, this is the street drug that's killing people. This is the drug that's killing people. And he's like, oh, they never want to. He's like, they should never use the name. And I'm like, why? He's like, because people want it more because of it. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, people will look for it and ask for it because if it's killing people, it must be the best shit on the street. It must be the stuff that will get you the best high and the strongest version of the drug. So it's something I never even thought of, but it's like, so it's another example of like, you tell people they can't have it. You tell people it's dangerous, and it will attract some of the riskier people, the people who want to do the risky things, So I mean, the whole thing is just, it's silly. It's another example of government, and it's not just that, it's another example of ideology. Somebody's personal ideology should not affect people's rights and freedoms and liberty to do what the fuck they want. Like, if I truly believed that smoking tobacco, and this is the thing, is like, this is, the majority of people are hypocrites, because it's like, if I'm a drinker, I'm like, yeah, ban that fucking weed, ban that vapes, ban the tobacco, because I'm a drinker. It doesn't affect my shit, But it's like, the second they start talking about alcohol, it's like, no, don't ban that, It's like, everybody is okay with other people losing their right to enjoy whatever they enjoy. It's to me, it's nonsense. Like, I don't give a shit what you do. Portugal decriminalized everything in 2001. It's been a complete success. Every way you could quantify if it was a success or not, it's been a success. So it's like, why aren't we entertaining this more? And not just that, the same government that was making it hard for people to get kratom, they were entertaining the idea of kratom becoming illegal. And I did a great show with Chris Bell, who did the documentary Bigger, Stronger, Faster and Prescription Thugs. Chris Bell, he did the film A Leaf of Faith about kratom and how it saved them in many different aspects, and saved a lot of people in regards of joint pain or in regards of depression or anxiety. And yet the government will take this plant medicine from you, or people, you would hear stories of people who lived in New Jersey that marijuana or hemp or whatever would help their child with violent seizures or some type of medical issue they were having, and then yet they still couldn't get it, and the government could care less that you weren't even using it to get high. They were making it illegal for everybody. So, and now, like you said, you can come down to Massachusetts, you can get marijuana anywhere. So they lie to you, years and years of lying to you, and not being ashamed of the fact that for medical reasons it could help people. And you were preventing people from getting this drug that could help people, all for your own political purposes or for financial purposes. And yet now we think like, oh no, they care about helping us now. It's like, there's so much evidence that they don't give a fuck about you.
It's tax money too, especially weed. That's all they care about. They weren't getting tax dollars when you're buying it from the guy down the street.
Well, that's the argument with moonshining, right? Like, they're like, well, how come I can go buy whiskey and I can't, and moonshine is illegal, and yet that's like deep rooted in American history. I mean, what's more American than moonshining?
NASCAR started.
Yeah. And you look at like Portuguese and Italians, we always have some moonshine around. We call it aguardente. Italians call it grappa, but it's basically a version of moonshine. And the reason why we always have a bottle of it laying around is because after you make your wine, you use the skins of the grapes to make your moonshine. So what ends up happening is one fruit gives you 2 alcohols. So, instead of throwing the skins away, you use it, you make some grappa or you make some moonshine. And yet that's illegal. I mean, they're doing it illegally. Like they can make wine, but they can't make moonshine because moonshine's easy, it's cheap, and there's no way of them taxing you, at least when you're, so it's like you said, it's same thing with marijuana. Marijuana, you could grow anywhere, and you bypass, them getting their cut. They're no different than the union wanting their cut, or the government wants their cut. And that's what it's about. It's about their cut. It's not about your safety. It's not about your health. It's not about protecting you. It's about them getting their cut. And that's what it's always about. I mean, look at Newsom going out to the most expensive restaurant in fucking United States of America. Okay. Where like, I've heard stories of people going out to eat, just 2 people, and you could just try, but it's almost impossible to spend less than a couple grand at this restaurant. I mean, that's how expensive it is.
And this restaurant, French Laundry, has been one of the in the culinary world, like the Mecca, right? Every chef wants to go and have dinner there, and you'll go a couple people, and you'll be a few grand into it once you're done with wine and all that. Yeah.
And they think this guy who can spend a couple grand at a restaurant, whose vineyard was open when everybody else's were closed, whose kids were going to a school when everybody else's were at home. People think that like this guy can relate to the average person, or is the average person, or can understand like the struggles that you and I might go through. Like this guy is so detached from our lives that, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why people like podcasts like mine and like yours and people with average people, because the majority of us are going through similar things. We can't relate to the rich dude who has a private jet. We can't relate, so it's like, they're so detached from us. So when they give you all that, bullshit about like, wanting to help the middle class, they don't even know what the fuck the middle class is. Like what they might be considered the middle class might be somebody we might consider loaded, So it's like, to me, it's like, what do you consider the middle class? Like, somebody who owns a bunch of cars and properties and has a portfolio. I don't have a fucking portfolio. I remember Mitt Romney when he was running, he was talking about his struggles of when he was in college. Like some of his struggles was putting together his portfolio and his investments and all this stuff. And he talked about being so poor in college that him and his wife had to decide what they were selling from their portfolio. I'm like, you are delusional. I'm like, there's kids who are eating canned food in college because you've convinced them that fucking this $100,000 college is going to be the best thing for them, and yet you're talking about investments. Like, I thought college was an investment. I thought that was supposed to be the investment for me to get by and then to get a good job and be able to make a living. So it's just like, it's wild. These people are delusional. They're not us. It's like some YouTube comment, that somebody said on one of my shows where they're like, it's not red versus blue, it's them versus you. And it's like, it's a perfect little slogan because that's exactly it. It's like, stop fighting with people who are on the same pay scale as you, or people who aren't benefiting from the bullshit that they're pushing on us. Like, we're fighting with each other and we're not the ones benefiting from any of this. We're the ones getting fucked by everybody. So it's, I realize it's weird. Maybe it's because I'm talking to people from New Hampshire. I feel like I swore more today. I feel like it's more acceptable today. I'm like, these guys are going to be okay with me swearing. I'll just throw a couple of pops.
Even if we weren't from New Hampshire, we'd be okay with that. But you still didn't answer the question. What cigar? If you were to sit down on a Saturday night and you were to...
So I like my what is it? My father's cigars are really good. Drew Estates actually does. So Drew Estates does acids. They also make a lot of other great cigars that aren't acid and
Pravada.
Yeah.
The number 9 and the Dirty Rat are absolutely phenomenal. Yeah.
I even so I like the Hoyo Excalibur. The Excalibur's a good cigar. The Dom Pepin Black Label. I like Dom Pepin. They make a lot of good stuff. But I really like the Black Label. There's one called that's
my father. You know that Don Pepin.
Yeah, they make. And And then there's one. It's a really mild cigar, like a really like light cigar, but it's phenomenal. It's by I don't never know how to pronounce the cigar company, but it's like Casano or Casuno or Casano.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they make one called 18, and it's tobacco aged 18 years.
Yeah,
and it's so inexpensive. You'd be like, there's no way this could be, and it's so smooth. Like sometimes you just don't want the real heavy cigar. Like I've done it, and but even myself, like if I don't smoke cigar, like in the summer I'll smoke a little more often, but even in the summer, like sometimes I get too cocky where I'm like, oh yeah, I can smoke a full body cigar, and you're bullshitting, you're smoking a tad too fast, and all of a sudden you're like lightheaded and you're a little nauseous, and you're like, holy fuck, I'm not ready for this, and it's and you feel high. It's wild, but there's something about the tobacco buzz with the like alcohol buzz that I'm like, it's second to none. I mean, it's so relaxing, like just having like that little bit of a buzz from the alcohol, whatever you're drinking, if it's whiskey or whatever, if it's bourbon, scotch, whatever. Or with the cigar buzz, it's just like it's so nice. So those are some of my go-to. I like some of the Victor Sinclair stuff. He does like some really good inexpensive stuff if you want like an everyday smoke. He made these things called the 5-5, and it's like it's 5 different tobaccos all aged 5 years, and so they have some like Dominican tobacco and there's some Nicaraguan tobacco. I really like Nicaraguan tobacco and Honduras tobacco. What's that?
The Nicaraguan tobacco is the best. I mean,
I agree. All the cigars I like
out of Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
All the ones I seem to like the most, like when I first got into cigars, it just happened that I'm like, okay, which cigars do I like? I'm like, I really like this one. I'm like, let me remember this. And they always happen to be from Nicaragua. It just happened. I'm like, oh, let me see where it's from. It's like Nicaragua. And then I'm like, oh, I really like this cigar. Where's this from? Nicaragua. So it's there's also a Rocky Patel called Wall Street. I don't know if you ever smoked that one. That's phenomenal too. I've smoked it a few times. It's called Wall Street. I'm trying to think if there's another name for it. I think it literally just has a band. It's a Rocky Patel and then band, and then it has another band that says Wall Street on it, which is phenomenal. It's supposed to make you, I guess, feel like a banker or something. But
Michael Douglas, what was his name in Wall Street? Gordon Gecko.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm trying to think. It's funny because some of my go-tos during the winter, and obviously you guys know, live in New England, you don't really get a chance to smoke much. So I
do. My wife had to cut me down on it. I was pretty bad. I would get out of work and I would finish work at the cigar shop, and we have the cigar shop in town called Two Guys, and they have a nice lounge in there. They don't serve any booze or anything. You just go buy your cigar, sit down, snip it and smoke it, and I'd finish my day out there, man. I was going every day.
Well, how different is it than somebody at the end of the day having a glass of wine? It's the same thing. Like, so I've always made the argument that because my wife's like, okay, you're a health freak, you exercise every day, you eat healthy, you're constantly doing research on diet, nutrition, and all this stuff, but you smoke cigars, and I'm like, she's like, it seems counterproductive, and I'm like, it's not, because the part that you're forgetting is that mental health might be the most important health and the most neglected health. So I can do all these things for my body, but sometimes my mental health needs some help too. And having a cigar and having that time to like hit reset, self-reflect, either sometimes you have a cigar and you're rethinking things and you're reevaluating your actions and your journey. And other times you might not need that. Sometimes you just need to completely clear your mind, just enjoy the cigar and hit reset and just not think about anything. Whatever it may be, that like a little spiritual moment with the cigar and the drink where I'm just like, get time to be one with my thoughts. That's necessary. And any negative effects that I might have from the tobacco, won't be as important as the positive effects I get from having that experience. So I think to me it's and really there's been, and believe me, I've searched, there's very little to no research proving that cigars are really that bad for you. Like it's there. First, when you look at cigarettes, and if I listed all the ingredients on cigarettes, it has hundreds, all this the different stuff that they throw in cigarettes. You look at cigars, you have tobacco, and then you have like the vegetable oil or whatever, or glue or whatever they use sometimes to keep it together. But that's it. It's tobacco. It's literally tobacco. You're not breathing in anything else. You look at these tobacco families, it's generation and generation and generation working on these tobacco farms. You look at the names that you see on cigars. Many times it's the same families that are working on these tobacco fields, and they smoke all the time. They smoke, and that's the thing I tell people, like, you do realize it's just a leaf that is dried. I'm like, that's it, and then you have you have your filler, you have the tobacco inside, and you have the wrapper and all that stuff. I'm like, so it's a combination of some tobaccos, and then you're smoking it. That's it. But there's no additives. There's nothing to it. I'm like, that's why you need a humidor, because tobacco shouldn't last that long when in a product. So when you look at a cigarette, like, it shouldn't last that long. You shouldn't be able to put a carton of cigarettes in your house anywhere and just go get a box from time to time, and it shouldn't taste the same, and it shouldn't always be good, in regards to just tobacco not cracking or going stale. I'm like, that means there's shit in it. It's no different than, food. I'm like, a loaf of bread should go bad. People go to local bakeries. We have local Polish bakeries and Portuguese bakeries and Italian bakeries. You buy bread or you buy anything there, it goes bad after a while, after a couple of days. That's what food should do. Like, it's not, food shouldn't last that long. So I think it's really important for people to understand that, like, sometimes you are comparing apples to oranges. Like, it's not the same thing. Like, cigarettes gave tobacco smoking a bad name, but I mean, the Native Americans were smoking tobacco. I mean, you go through history. I mean, there's some people who believe, it goes way further back on the history of smoking tobacco. It's, debated kind of who initially first learned how to smoke tobacco, but it's something that's been done for a long period of time. When I had Delicia from the Cigar Vixen on my show, she talked about how, like, she's everywhere. She's in all the cigar magazines. She goes to all the parties. She goes to all the events. She goes to all the openings of the big cigar lounges. She goes to all these things. She's constantly around people who their whole lives revolve around cigars and are constantly smoking. Why isn't there any evidence that all these people are dying of lung cancer young or whatever? Like, it's because it's not the tobacco that's killing you. It's all the other shit, the tar and the preservatives, all that stuff. It's the same thing that gives beef a bad name, because people ate McDonald's, got fat and unhealthy, and they're like, oh yeah, it must be because meat's bad for me. It must be the hamburger. No, it's the quality of what you're eating. It's not what you're eating. It's the quality of what you're eating. So I think that's an important point to kind of get people to understand, because people will just lump all these things together and think it's the same thing. It's not.
Awesome. I think that was a great way to end it. One thing I wanted to ask you before we go, and you just need to say yes or no. Will you send me a good bacalhau recipe?
Bacalhau?
A bacalhau, Portuguese salt
codfish?
Recipe? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you like bacalhau. It's funny. Like, that's one of those things that, like, if you're not Portuguese, you don't eat it.
I'm an Irish guy, so I make a mean Finn and Hattie. And I worked at Harvard for 10 years, and all the Portuguese people would talk about bacalhau, get the salt cod. And in the 10 years that I was there, I never got a recipe from anybody. And you're my last hope, man.
I don't eat it much anymore. Well, I don't eat it much at all.
Soak it and change the water and soak it again. Yeah,
it's a process.
Soak in the salt.
The salt cures it, and preserves it. So you basically have this, like, salt dehydrated piece of fish that you could just, like, knock on the table.
Really?
Yeah.
It's why. Well, you think about it, like, before there was refrigeration, that's how they used to keep things from. They did salt the shit out of it. It would take all the moisture out, which would prevent any bacteria or whatever. But yeah, it's I'll see. But there's a recipe my mother used to make when I was a kid that I used to love, and now I don't eat any carbs now, so I don't eat it anymore. But it was like French fries, eggs, bacalhau, codfish, all in this, like, stew of, like, things, and it was, like, so delicious growing up, and it was the only way she could get me to, like, eat fish growing up. Well, I always loved octopus. That's not true, because I've always loved octopus. And then we make these, like, they're like little bacalhau, like, cakes, like, they're like fried, and a lot of times the Portuguese people put them out for Christmas or holidays, and it's like these little bacalhau cakes where, like, they just fry it in a pan, and then it's like, it looks like this little ball of bacalhau, and it's actually pretty good. So yeah, I'll have to see. The nice thing about like living in Ludlow and this like part of the state is that, you know, Ludlow, Chicopee, there's a lot of like Portuguese and Polish people like right off the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like access to like butcher shops where you can get like bacalhau, you can get you know, fresh cut stuff. You know, if I want to get ground meat, they can ground the meat right there. Yeah. And so it's like it is, and they make all their own chorizo, like their sausage. Like my parents make sausage. You know, so many of my friends and relatives make sausage. So like, oh, let me try this person's sausage. That sounded kind of gay, but you know, get what I mean. but
we know what you meant. Don't worry, we don't judge.
But it's fun because it's like there's a pride in like we made this, you know, and you know, here's my recipe slightly different. You know, here's this recipe slightly different. So even in town, like I know which butcher shop to go to if I want like the best chorizo, if I want the best steak, if I want, you know, like there's certain places that just have better stuff than others. But it's nice to have that, and in supporting local businesses, you know, like I always tell people, I'm like, dude, go to the butcher shop. I'm like, it's going to be cheaper than going to Big Y, and you're watching them cut your meat right in front of you. You're watching them cut it right in front of you. You're buying products that are going in their pocket, not some big corporate company that they're going to spend back in the community. You know, so you're helping the community by helping the community. You know, so you buy from the community and you help the community. So it's to me, that's super important, you know, eat healthy. And that's where 2020, like, I think did the most damage is that prior to 2020, I mean, the popularity of mom and pop places and butcher shops and coffee shops. I mean, I remember I was working in the Berkshires and there was like, I mean, it's very country, but there's a fucking like little mom and pop coffee shop around every corner. And it just like, it was awesome that there wasn't like you know, when we're working up there, I'd be like, oh, I'll go get coffee for the guys. Like I couldn't even find a Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. You know, it was awesome that was the problem that I had. And yet like now you just fucking killed small businesses and like force fed big box stores and corporate stores because they're the only ones that were open. So it's
why is that? You know what I mean? It's like, what, there's no COVID there? Come on. Like,
well, that was the argument that a lot of small businesses were making. It's like, okay, so you're making me go through all these hula hoops or not be open, or like there's a local restaurant, real good local restaurant. If you guys are ever in the area, if you're ever in the area, tell me. But if for people listening, if you're ever in the area, there's a great restaurant called the Primavera, and my wife works at the Villa Rose, another great one, but the Primavera is a really small little like mom and pop place. One of those places that like it's always, they fit as many people as they can in this small little place and people love it. It's always busy, but it's like this really like gem of a place and it's always busy, but it's small. So when they had limited capacity, they're like, dude, we can't, like with the capacity they're telling us, like we can't even, it doesn't pay the bills. Like we can't even stay open. Like it wouldn't even pay for the necessities. So they had to shut down for a while. You know, they had to shut down because they're like, we can't afford to be open. And the restaurant business, as you probably know, Matt, I mean, like it's already one of the hardest businesses to survive and you know, grow in. And then you made it just about impossible. And the thing is, like, it's not just the businesses that went out of business that got hurt. Like that's the other thing. People are like, oh, you know, this business is still open, that business is still open. I mean, I'm like, yeah. So a lot of businesses failed and had to shut down. And now if you make the argument that like, well, at least some did survive, like how much debt are they in to survive? How much fucking, you know, lack of profit did they make? And they had to go into their savings or get a credit, you know, from a bank to pay their bills just to stay open, hoping that they could kind of, you know, keep it together until things finally opened up. I mean, my wife works in the restaurant business. She's been working in the restaurant business her whole life. And she's always had a bank job and a restaurant job. She always had like two gigs when I met her, and then eventually, I'm glad she left the bank job because that was all, you know. Obviously, we all have the same opinion on banks. You know, it's like they take our money and then borrow it out, you know, and make money off our money and don't really do anything besides charge us for, you know, getting our money back in many cases. So, but she's been in the restaurant business, and it's like during the holidays, the media and the TV and the local news would just scare the shit out of people. She was making zero money. Like nobody was going to the restaurant, and her boss, you know, kept her on the payroll because he's like, I just don't want you to leave. I don't want, you know, and I want to keep you around. but she's like, I'm a waitress. I'm like, I have to make money off tips. She's a bartender. She makes money off tips. Like, it wasn't even worth her time showing up. She did it because she was supporting the business, and she didn't want to leave him hanging. She didn't want to ask to go on unemployment and leave him with no employees, So you put everybody in a shitty situation because people like her, like, could easily be selfish and be like, you know what? Like, let me go on unemployment because I'll make more money. And then he's just on his own. Fuck him, But like we always talked about, I'm like, when things get better, which hopefully they will, I'm like, he'll appreciate it and he'll take care of you. And he took care of you in the past. He'll appreciate that you're a loyal employee. And so be loyal back to the business. And it pays off. All the people who weren't loyal, who left him hanging, chefs or whoever, in many cases, I would talk to restaurant owners and they're like, my chef left or my staff left, and I have nobody who wants to work. Now, now the time comes to look for work when finally the unemployment runs out. People are looking for work, and guess what? There's no fucking jobs because all the people who are mooching off unemployment contributed to these businesses failing. So it's just like, to me, it was so evil for Massachusetts to just scare people not to go out during the holidays when the restaurants could finally make a little extra money, where people are a little bit more generous with tips. People are going shopping for the holidays, and they're like, hey, we're not going to cook tonight. Let's go out to eat. All that. All those things that help really the whole economy were just completely stripped, and they were doing it on purpose, and magically now all of a sudden everything's fine. It's like nothing's fucking changed from this height of the summer when people were I went to your state during, I believe it was 4th of July. Yeah, I went up there for 4th of July, and things seemed pretty good. Like people, we went to Hampton Beach, and everybody seemed to be having a good time, and nobody was too strict about things. And I was having barbecues at my house, and people were coming over, and then all of a sudden the news just tells you, hey, I know you leave your house and everything seems to be fine, and it seems like everything we told you was bullshit lies.
When you're sick and dying, like,
yeah. But it's not. So stay home. And people are like, okay, well, I think for myself, I guess I'll just stay home. It's like, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I'm like, they've been wrong the whole time. Why do you believe them now? And during the holidays, they scared everybody to stay home. And then, like I said, they just, a lot of businesses that were barely surviving, that, it was the last nail in the coffin, and it's just, to me, it's just like, it's evil when you think about this is politically motivated, or, or they're getting money from the vaccine companies. Big pharma, which of course they are. Why wouldn't they be? So it's just like, it's so evil because they don't, like I said, they don't give a fuck about the average person. They're so detached from the average person. It's people just, I don't know, man. I thought we were going to end this on something positive, and I just fucked that up big time. Sorry, guys.
No, that's okay. I think that was perfect. I think this was a great talk, man. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I had big time cold feet asking you. My hand is still clammy. And, that was awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
Ask people. Let me end it on a tip for you guys, and a tip for anybody else who listens to you guys who is thinking about starting a podcast. Don't be shy. Ask anybody you're a fan of, anybody that you think you might have a good conversation with. Don't be afraid to ask them. The worst they can do is say no or not respond or whatever. That still happens. That still happens to me. I get people all the time who are like, oh, I can't or whatever. You can kind of tell, like, okay, you're beating around the bush a little bit, and I don't know why or whatever, but whatever. And then the weirdest things happen. Like a year later, some publisher will be like, hey, do you want to have this author on to promote his book? And I'm like, wait, that author is the same guy that I've been trying to get on for like years, and I can't get him to respond to me, and now he's willing to come on. So that's happened a few times with me, and also sometimes you'll just be surprised by the people who are willing to come on and how generous people are with their time. And when people believe that you're trying to do the same things they're doing, and that's just being thought provokers, then a lot of people are generous. But don't worry about asking, and don't worry about asking too often, because I will sometimes, like, there's certain guests where I won't get a response. I'll email them, and then I'll be like, oh, let me reconnect with this guy, see if I can get a hold of him, or let me see if I can find another method of getting a hold of them. And I'll have no luck. And I'm like, okay, are they avoiding me, or are they not responding because they're busy? And then one day you'll just write an email, and like this Ben Swan is a perfect example. I've been attempting to get Ben Swan on my show. I've been a huge fan of his for a long time. Could not get a hold of him. I even contacted people that I knew who knew him, and I'm like, dude, like, can you give me a tip? How do I get what do I have to do? Go drive to his house? Like, how do I get a hold of this guy? And they're like, oh, I don't know, just try emailing him, whatever. So and then so I wasn't getting any help. And then one day I remember this because it was yesterday. It was a Saturday morning, and I'm like, before I had to bring like my kids to sports or dance or whatever, I'm like, oh, let me just write some emails real quick. And I write an email to Ben Swan, and literally like 2 seconds later, I get a response. Yeah, sure. What time you want me to come on, or what day you want me to come on? I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, it's this easy? I'm like, well, and it's just like, and I was this close of like believing that I had the wrong email address, and I even went back. I'm like, dude, was I writing to the same email address? And it was like the same email address. For some reason, I just got through that day. And and then there's people like I had Marianne Van Zeller on, who I could not get a hold of for the life of me. And she had a great show at the time called Breaking Borders, which I don't know if you remember that show, but they had this like world famous chef, and she was a journalist. And what they would do, they would go to a place where there's conflict between two different type of people, like the border of the U.S. and Mexico, or Palestine, and they would get somebody from both sides of the argument, a Jewish person and a Muslim, and they would have this chef. They would say, hey, we're going to make this amazing food for you, and all you have to do is sit at the table with this other person that you might disagree with and enjoy the food. We're not going to tell you to discuss anything or whatever. Just hang out with this other person, and in return we'll give you this 5-star meal. And so they had this chef who would go there. It was interesting because he would go there, and you guys might appreciate this because you guys seem to appreciate good food. He would go like find exactly what their cultures ate and really like make it the way they make it and whatever. And it brought people together. Like, it was amazing how food actually brought people together and they got along or whatever. And one day I ended up like, I couldn't get a hold of her. One day I tweeted her, and I've tweeted her before, couldn't get a hold of her. Like, I'm like, let me try tweeting her. I don't like tweeting and annoying people that way. I'm like, I don't think it's going to work. And then like I tweeted her, I got a response. Yeah, I'll be on, like, send me your email address and we'll connect. And I'm like, what the fuck? So it's like, it's just keep doing it, just keep pursuing it, find creative ways. Like, one trick that I would do is like, so if it's an author who's written multiple books, a lot of times authors will have a website specific to that book, so they'll have the title of the book.com. And so sometimes when the author gets more popular, they don't put a email address on there because they'll get too many emails and they'll be overwhelmed. But then they might have a old book, with an old website that still has that email address. So I'll go there. Oh, I'm like, oh shit, look, I found an email address. Let me try it this way. So I'll try all their websites, whatever websites they have. If they're a part of an organization, like if they're a part of a group, like, if they're a chairman on some type of nonprofit organization, I'll contact the organization like, hey, can you help me get a hold of this guy? I'm trying to get a hold of this guy. I know you work with him. So I'll do everything, Instagram messages. I'll do everything that it takes, and I'll revisit it over and over again. If it's somebody I'm really passionate about having on, I'll just, keep going down every avenue. I mean, for a long time, I wouldn't ask anybody for help because I'm like, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want people to think like I'm only friends with them because I want help to book guests, So I didn't feel comfortable. Now, from time to time, I'll be like, hey, like, do you know what the best method of like getting a hold of this person? I'll ask for advice or whatever. But it's only because so many people have asked me throughout the years that I'm just like, you know what, like, I guess people are always asking me. I guess this is acceptable in the community to like ask people for help. So then, I start doing it from time to time, but it'll be like my last resort. I'll be like, it's maybe it's a pride thing, or I'm convinced that like I can get a hold of them on my own. But it'll be a last resort. But even that, like, don't be ashamed to ask people for help. Don't be ashamed. Like I said, we've all been there. Like you guys won't be the first one to ask me for contact information for somebody. You won't be the last one. You won't be the first ones that ask me for help for another thing or another, or for whatever it may be. And most of us are, I can't speak for everybody, but just about everybody I'm connected with are more than happy to help. If they have the time, they will go out of their way to help you any way they can. So definitely, I'm gonna be like the least famous guest you had on the show. Hopefully, you guys take my advice. You pursue all those other people that are more famous that you guys really like, and you know, I'm really excited to see how the show grows and see how, you know, where from where it started to where it eventually ends, because like all podcasters, it's like you end up molding it and coming up with better ideas and better logos and better ways of doing the show and all that stuff, and it becomes more and more fun and less work, because I think initially, you know, like you were saying, you had clammy hands. I had like anxiety before every episode. I'm like, I'm a fucking idiot. I'm an idiot. I'm not. I can't do this. You know, it's like, you know, and so, you know, that does for the most part go away.
So just in case people don't know that are listening, where can they find you? I'm sure everyone that's listening here is going to know.
Yeah, well,
let's do it.
You can go to the rippleeffectpodcast.com. That's where you can listen to the show, but I also have links there to like my YouTube channel, or you can just search the Ripple Effect Podcast on YouTube or any podcast app, Spotify, iTunes. Podcast Addict is the one I use. You can find that show just about everywhere and anywhere, and the video you can find on YouTube still. Like we talked about before, I don't know how I can interview people like Mickey Willis and Dr. David Martin and all these people and still be on YouTube. I think you guys are on YouTube.
Yes.
Do you age restrict your stuff by any chance?
If we did, it's by accident.
Yeah. No. I know what you're saying. When you upload the video,
they ask you if it's friendly.
Age restriction. There's, I don't remember what I put. I don't think I age restricted it. You think you should age restrict it? I've heard you mention this before.
Yeah. Well, I just, it's a possibility. It might be one of the things that has helped is that because they give you also the option if it's kid friendly, if it's for kids or not.
Yeah. That's it.
Like,
it's not kid friendly or something.
That's good. Yeah. I do that, and I stop tagging anything that I think could get me in trouble. Like I'll put my guest's name, but I won't put any of the controversial topics we might be talking about. So I won't put like, you know, COVID or Corona. I'll be like, okay, if somebody wants to find the show and if they want to find this guest, hopefully they can still find it. But either way, it's probably going to be suppressed anyways. Even if I do use those tags, like they're not going to be force fed my show. They're going to be force fed something else. So it's like, what benefit do I have of tagging these controversial topics unless, you know, unless I'm looking to get kicked off YouTube. So that seemed to be like a little tip that I don't, honestly, I'm still like, me and Corbett were like the two people that I'm just like, how are we still on YouTube? I mean, especially Corbett, because he has a fucking huge following. He's now starting to have issues with flagging or whatever. But I mean, he has millions and millions of views and hundreds of videos. How he hasn't gotten in trouble before was very surprising. I was waiting for people to start calling him or myself a shill. They're like, they must be working with the man. They must be, CIA or something like that.
It could still come down the line. Who knows?
So, but it's good to be on all other platforms too. So yeah, so I'm on YouTube, I'm on Odyssey, Library, Float for video platforms. I have a show on Rockfin called Ricky Rants and Rockfin. I do a Patreon show, which I'm actually planning on maybe doing this weekend. So I don't know if I'm going to do it Saturday or Sunday, but I think I'm going to share with the Patreon supporters. Hopefully I don't have any issues with Patreon in the future, and I can continue using. I don't post anything on Patreon besides like, you know, updates. So maybe I won't get in trouble. Who knows? I mean, I'll use all these platforms for as long as I can, but I know, you know, I'm destined, just like all of us who, go against the grain. We're destined to be kicked off, and eventually we'll all just be focused on BitChute and Odyssey and Library and the places that are much more open to the controversial topics and discussions. But yeah, just about anywhere you can find podcasts or videos, you can find my work. We have a merch store at Ripple Effect Podcast merch. And then the Union of Unwanted, kind of similar idea. It's available, has its own RSS feed, so you can get it on any podcast app. It's also on I don't know if it's on, no, it's not on BitChute, but it is on Library, and it's on Float, and it's on YouTube. And then we just opened a merch store recently. So we just literally announced it this week. So we're excited about that. And then that's it. That's about all my shows and all my platforms.
Awesome, man.
Awesome, Ricky.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and chatting with us. Would you mind holding on for 1 second once I stop recording?
Yeah, no problem.